training. By the end of next week, you'll probably only have 15 left.
Ministers say they need to push ahead with the early release programme to avoid the collapse of the prison system. A former neo-Nazi selected as a Conservative council candidate has withdrawn, saying he must show how much he regrets his previous actions. Kemi Badenoch has instead offered Joshua Bonehill-Payne a role as an advisor for the party's Culture and Integration Commission. A former Labour MP who was a victim of his anti-Semitic abuse has described the move as an insult. A 35-year-old man has appeared in court charged with murder following the death of a 9-year-old girl. Minnie Merriman was found injured at an industrial estate in Arbroath on Monday while her family were camping in the area. Christopher Rice from Wakefield will appear again within the next 8 days. The police marksman who shot Chris Cabba will not face disciplinary proceedings. A jury previously cleared Martin Blake of murdering the 24-year-old when officers tried to stop his car in South London in 2022. The watchdog has dropped its case after the government changed regulations around police use of force. Campaigners call it a disgrace, but the country's top police officer, Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley, welcomes the move.
It is unacceptable that if you're prepared to run towards danger, that you should have your life turned upside down for years and years of unacceptable scrutiny in a process that should take weeks, not years.
And a crisis meeting of FIFA officials called by its president is underway in Morocco. European football leagues issued a statement earlier criticising Gianni Infantino's now abandoned plans to sell stakes in the World Cup. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 8 points at 10,888. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.16. LBC weather tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north. Clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds, a low of 8. Early cloud and a few showers tomorrow, turning drier with sunny spells for most later, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks.
Good evening, everyone. I am in for Ian Dale again this evening and tomorrow night and next week. It's lovely to be with you, however you are consuming our programme, whether you're listening to us on the radio or your mobile or watching us on the LBC official YouTube channel, the Global Player or the LBC app. Welcome aboard. Coming up tonight at 9, have you ever ridden in a self-driving taxi even? Would you? They are coming to the streets of London initially with a human safety driver aboard, but we all know that is not likely to last long. If you clamber aboard a driverless taxi, are you not contributing to the inevitable loss of jobs that will eventually follow for human cab drivers? We're going to talk about that at 9. At 8, Green Party leader Zach Polanski says fossil fuel companies should pay for the country to acquire a fleet of firefighting helicopters. It turns out we haven't got very many of them. What else do you think big oil should be paying for as we figure out how to deal with extreme heat that he called the biggest crisis since the Second World War today? Mr. Polanski will be joining me in the studio after the news at 8. This hour we'll get a live update on the stabbing of 4 men in Covent Garden. That's coming in around 20 minutes' time. But our main topic this hour is once again the pickle in which Prime Minister Andy Burnham has placed himself over early prison releases. We heard public fury on the programme last night from many of you about the fact that the killers of PC Andrew Harper are still going to be eligible for early release, while the government says it can only promise to keep rapists, grooming gang members and people convicted of violent sexual offences behind bars to serve their sentences. Otherwise, the Prime Minister has indicated the prison system would collapse.
This is an incredibly difficult situation for the government. Any government in power at the moment would have to make the same decision in terms of releasing some prisoners early.
That is the head of Thames Valley Police, Chief Constable Jason Hogg. He worked with PC Andrew Harper and says that he is considering joining legal action by the Thames Valley Police Federation that is aimed at stopping the government from granting the constable's killers early release.
I do think there are some choices here, and I would urge the government to reconsider their position, because I'm worried about the impact on the morale of policing across the UK.
If this programme was anything to go by last night, there is deep anger in the policing community over the government's decision.
I used to be a policeman many, many years ago, so this is quite a subject close to my heart.
That is LBC caller Jeff in Bishop Stortford, whose anger over the prospective release of PC Harper's Killers was plain to everyone listening to this programme exactly 24 hours ago.
If the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary and the Justice Minister think they can get away with this, they've got another thing coming. I will back up and I will make verbal protests and physical protests about this. This cannot be allowed to go ahead. They've got to stop these people coming out of prison. They've murdered or called manslaughter of a serving police officer carrying out his duty. That has got to be one of the most heinous crimes against the social state that we have. We have to have law and order. If people who murder or cause manslaughter of a police officer carrying out his duty are allowed to walk free, then we are in for major, major, major social problems.
With legal challenges being mounted, this is not an issue that is going to move to the back burner. And on LBC this morning, it almost sounded like the government had not necessarily considered every possible move before announcing its plan. On Nick Ferrari at breakfast, Justice Minister Jake Richards did not have a particularly convincing answer to this question.
Why don't you just change the law?
Well, we have changed the law in regard...
now, for the two killers of Andrew Harper. We have Harper's Law now, as you will know better than I, because of the great work of his widow, Lizzie Harper. Why don't you just seek to make that retrospective?
Well, it's very difficult when...
I know it's very difficult.
Well, Nick,
that's what you and your colleagues are empowered to do.
Nick, two things, if I may. So, retrospective changes to criminal sentencing is not something that, as a functioning jurisdiction, that we have ever properly considered.
So change it. Look, keep these two killers behind bars. You know that would receive national support.
We are going to be, of course, always engaging with the Harper family. What would be very difficult... I'm not talking
about engaging with the Harper family.
But Nick,
I'm talking about a situation where the killers of an emergency were... And I know now, if we were having this conversation about a case that went before the court today, but I'm talking about something that was called national outrage that you actually, relatively easily, you and your colleagues, could address.
Well, Nick, we'll always look at the options that are available.
You do not have to be a hard-bitten cynic to listen to that and think they've rushed this. They have not given it the time or the thought necessary to find a way of keeping killers behind bars whose release the public finds unacceptable. Do you agree with the Chief Constable of Thames Valley that this cannot stand and needs to be looked at again? And I know it's still early days, but you could have said the same about winter fuel at the beginning of Sir Keir Starmer's time in office. Does this give you any pause to wonder whether the Prime Minister is as attuned to the views of the public as he claims? Is Mr Burnham listening? Call me at 0345 6060 973. Same number for WhatsApp as it is for the phones. You can also text 84850. We're going to start our conversation tonight with two of my absolutely excellent LBC colleagues, both Andy Hughes, LBC's crime correspondent, and Bethany Dawson, LBC's political correspondent, because there have obviously been developments in both areas over the last 24 hours. And Andy, let me start with you first of all. We heard there, and we heard last night on the programme, the growing anger among the policing community. Do you think that there is now a determination, particularly on the part of Thames Valley and the force there, to try and force the government into a U-turn on this?
Oh, without doubt, Simon. This is one of those rare occasions where a senior police officer has publicly objected to a government decision. They do it all the time in private, of course. This doesn't happen often. Police chiefs prefer to stay out of politics, but this is an issue that the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Jason Hogg, felt compelled to speak out about. And the background to this is the Prime Minister announced earlier this week that murder, rape, child sex offences and grooming are to be excluded from the government's early prison release scheme, but not manslaughter, which means that Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole, who were convicted of the manslaughter of PC Andrew Harper, could be released in a matter of months. And it was this very case that led to a change in law. In 2022, Parliament passed Harper's Law, which means that anyone convicted of the manslaughter of an emergency worker will receive a mandatory life sentence. Because the government has the power to set the criteria for the early release scheme, we saw them do that just 2 days ago, they could have indeed included those convicted of killing an emergency worker in this, but they didn't. So what are the options for the government now? The Attorney General cannot refer this case to the Court of Appeal to reconsider the sentence because that process has already happened, and that was back in 2020 when these defendants were sentenced. So that option is off the table. What they can do is pause the scheme again and exclude this specific type of conviction. It's really not a complicated process. All it would require is for the Prime Minister, the Attorney General and the Justice Secretary to agree that it should be exempt from the early release scheme. I can tell you that there are very few convictions for the manslaughter of an emergency worker. Just to give you an idea, Simon, since Harper's Law was introduced 4 years ago, there has not been one single conviction for this. So it's hardly the case that prisons are overrun by this type of inmate. PC Andrew Harper's death changed the law. It was an acknowledgement that what happened to PC Harper demanded tougher justice. And yet, two of the very men whose actions inspired it could walk free early. And I think regardless of anything, there is a petition to not allow the early release of the two convicted killers. And that, last time I looked, has well over 350,000 signatures, and it's still growing. Now, normally, petitions that gather more than 100,000 signatures are debated in Parliament. So that may well happen when Parliament resumes in September, if this is not resolved before then.
And Andy, you've eloquently reminded everybody that Harper's Law, of course, does not apply to Andrew Harper's killers. But what about this notion of how many people are in jail serving sentences for the manslaughter of police, ambulance workers, firefighters, emergency personnel? I mean, it cannot be that many people. You wonder why on earth they couldn't have drawn the line below the killers of PC Andrew Harper and anybody else that might be serving sentences for the manslaughter of emergency workers, because, as you indicated, we don't know the numbers, but the prisons can't be overrun with people that have committed that offence.
They can't be. It's an absolutely minute figure. I mean, this is a very, very rare type of offence. I think in my 20 years of covering crime, I've only known of 2 ever cases. So there's no way that these prisons and that the prison system will collapse if this is included. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But Andy Burnham and the government have a very, very tricky decision to make.
So let me bring in Bethany Dawson, LBC's political correspondent. Bethany, I know you've been taking the political temperature today among some of the Prime Minister's supporters about the reaction that we are seeing to this announcement earlier in the week. What is the mood among Labour MPs about what increasingly looks like a pretty substantial own goal in the very nascent stages of the Burnham administration?
It seems like a lot of people in Westminster have a bit of a headache over this. And that's not necessarily because they think Andy Burnham and Alex Norris, the Justice Secretary, have taken the wrong turn. It's that they don't feel like there is a right thing to do. Now, of course, you and many people listening may indeed say, well, the right thing to do would be specifically exempt PC Harper's killers. But the mood is essentially that in normal circumstances, as one minister put it to me, these scumbags, the men, as they put it, that killed PC Harper, should be in prison for a long time, but we are not in normal circumstances. And when you speak to MPs that are working on this topic area, whose brief involves prisons, justice, they specifically feel like there is a crisis on our doorstep, and the only way to solve it is by letting some people out of prison. And almost by the fact that these people are in prison, you kind of want to keep them there, right? These ministers, these MPs want to keep them there. But there is this catch-22, and I remember saying it when it was announced that Andy Burnham would be conducting an urgent review of the early release scheme, that anything he does will be the wrong thing to do. There is no right answer. And it is almost surprising that he chose to review it so publicly and almost offered a sense of false hope to the family, to the friends, to the supporters of PC Harper to think that he would... that the killers would be released.
I think that's exactly the point. I mean, they announced that they were going to engage in this review knowing that there was public anger over the possible early release of PC Harper's killers, and they come out of the review a fortnight later or so and say, right, we've done the review, but the killers of PC Harper are still going to be eligible for early release. I mean, that's an astonishing place for them to have ended up, given where they began.
For all we have praised Andy Burnham and his team's comms, I mean, this is sort of an error. It is an error. There should have been more communications about what could be expected. There is, of course, an argument his supporters would say, well, he didn't know what to expect from the early release scheme. That's why he did an urgent review to see if the current path the government was on was the right one to be on. But fundamentally, there probably should have been more, just caching that this wouldn't necessarily mean PC Harper's killers would be freed. It was almost teed up for the announcement to be that they would be kept in prison.
And Andy, this is not a great way for things to start in terms of a new Prime Minister's relationship, certainly with police in Thames Valley and arguably in other parts of the country as well.
No, not at all. And judging by my text messages that I've been receiving over the last 24 hours, no one is happy with the new Prime Minister based on this decision. I think the difference between... And Bethany hit the nail on the head there when she said the government looked as if they were teeing this decision up to keep these killers in jail.
Exactly.
And not to have the foresight to see that there was going to be public outcry from the police and the policing community and police leaders. And now they're facing legal challenges. I think what makes this case extraordinary is this is the very case that literally changed the law. And yet it is this case that is giving not only the government a massive headache, but is bringing into question the justice system itself.
Andy, Bethany, thank you both very much indeed for kicking the programme off tonight. That's Andy Hughes, LBC's crime correspondent, and Bethany Dawson, LBC's political correspondent. Lots of you texting in, lots of you calling in. Your opportunity to give me your view on all of this comes next. The phone number 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. It's coming up to 19 minutes past 7.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m.
Zach Polanski says the hot weather is the biggest threat Britain's faced since the Second World War. Is that a bit much, or is he right? Plus, a former neo-Nazi stands down as a Tory council candidate despite insisting he's changed. And talking of holding people to account, the police watchdog has dropped its investigation into the officer who shot dead Chris Cabba. We'll look at whether our police need more protection.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Serious about the right vitamins for you and your family? Trust Vitabiotics, the UK's #1 vitamin company for expert nutritional care for every age and lifestyle. Vitamins for everyone, including well man, well woman, well baby and well kid. From Boots, pharmacies and Vitabiotics.com. For #1 verification, see Vitabiotics.com.
When it's your kids' favourite show, when they'll learn something and have fun, when you just need a moment to yourself.
Right, while she's watching that, let's talk birthday party in the kitchen.
But I want to see who stole the fairy's magic hat too.
Nothing brings us together like great TV. And a TV licence covers you to watch all TV channels, so you can all enjoy the shows kids love to watch. Search TV Licence Together.
Simon Marks on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Or send us a text, which is what Elisa has done. She says, Simon, are you saying that successful governments need to follow the public's mood? Are we promoting government by populism now? Well, the answer to that is no. I'm not saying they have to follow the public's mood, but I am saying that Andy Burnham has made it absolutely clear and specifically stated in the first couple of weeks of his leadership that the one thing that he's never going to contemplate is allowing a wedge to be driven between him and the public. He says he's always going to be absolutely attuned to what the public thinks about various issues. And it seems pretty clear to me that on this issue, the public is sending him a message. And that message is keep the killers of PC Andrew Harper in jail serving their sentences and do not make them eligible for early release. Let's go to another Simon, who is in Edgware tonight here in London. Simon, good evening to you. What's your view?
It's you, the greatest name on earth.
Absolutely,
Simon.
100%. It's not as fashionable as it used to be, apparently. I can't think why.
Well, it's exclusive, that's why.
Yes, exactly.
Now, on to the subject. No, the early release scheme is a failure of the criminal justice system, and it did go back to when the Conservatives were in power, so you can't just blame Labour, but they've done nothing to redress it. The sentencing, the whole criminal justice system is shattered, in my opinion, because they could just make them exempt anyway. You have hundreds of places in a prison that was built a year ago. If you haven't got the staff, then bring the army in to staff it until you do. There are a number of barges which could be converted. You could have prison barges. They have that abroad, as you know. And a number of buildings, such as ex-police stations, former army camps, which could be converted in the meantime before you build more prisons. But you are sending the wrong message. What you're saying to criminals are, well, you know, you can get out early. My own view is that those sentences were woefully inadequate. I'm very hard line when it comes to you. That was... You know as well as I do. You spend a lot of time in the US, and I've been there many, many times. I've got friends all over the South. And in the United States, they have what is called murder in the second degree, as you probably know. Mm-hmm. And that's what would have happened. Had those three been committed that crime in the United States, they would have been charged with second-degree murder. And they would have served probably the rest of their lives in prison.
Well, yeah, except, Simon, I mean, that would depend on the particular state that the killing took place in. I mean, there are some parts of the United States where they may not even be serving the kind of sentences that they're serving now. But do you think the government's going to be forced into a U-turn on this?
Inevitable, but let's be honest about who we've got in the Prime Minister's office. We've got someone called Andy Burnham. Now, my view is that his tenure of Mayor of Manchester was one of abject failure, promises that were never kept, and I don't think he's fit to run this government anyway, and it's a disaster waiting to happen. I only hope that the British people will wake up and see that there's no bounce with Burnham. But the whole of the criminal justice system needs completely reforming, without question. I'm very much an advocate of the return of capital punishment to a referendum to go to the British people. When you're sentenced to life, you do life without parole. But it's not difficult for them to exempt them. I mean, they haven't looked at this properly. Of course they haven't. And there's probably many others that will slip through the system who have been convicted of manslaughter but not murder in the first degree with intent, and they'll be let out as well. And it is a very, very, very slippery slope.
Simon, thanks very much for kicking our conversation off this evening. That's Simon in Edgware. I think it is too early to say that the administration of Andy Burnham is going to be a complete disaster. And certainly there has been a Burnham bounce in early opinion polls that have cheered the spirits of Labour Party supporters. I just find it odd that you knew 2 weeks ago how strongly the public felt about this, which is why you put a pause on the early release scheme, and then you come out of that pause 2 weeks later and say, actually, we're going ahead with it, and the killers of PC Andrew Harper are going to be released anyway. More of your calls on this to come, but I want to get you an update on the story we've been covering all afternoon here on LBC. 4 men were stabbed in broad daylight in Covent Garden today. There were dramatic moments, not only at the scene of the stabbings, but in neighbouring Trafalgar Square, where an air ambulance landed as emergency workers responded to the incident. LBC's George Ellison, our reporter, has been covering the story from the scene and is with us live on the programme tonight. George, what is the latest on the 4 victims and also the investigation into what took place?
Well, Simon, I can tell you that the 4 men who were stabbed, 2 of which remain in hospital with injuries that we're told aren't thought to be life-threatening or life-changing. Another 2 have been discharged. Police have updated us saying that they're treating it as a random, isolated, mental health-related attack. Of course, a 47-year-old woman is in custody after being arrested on suspicion of possession of an offensive weapon, thought to be a pair of scissors, and assault, as you say, happening in broad daylight at lunchtime outside of the Shaftesbury Theatre in Covent Garden. And there were scenes of confusion when in neighbouring Trafalgar Square an air ambulance helicopter landed, prompting buskers to stop and tourists to get out of the way. I went there not long after and it had returned to normal, but it's alarming to think about the scene that air ambulance would have landed in, given just how many people are in that area at any one time. Now, we have been hearing from some bystanders who saw what happened and say that it seemed to come out of nowhere, this attack. These men were outside of this theatre and 2 others were on Endell Street nearby. They were supposedly minding their own business when this attack came about, and there was a small standoff, if you like, with police officers and a woman that bystanders say was waving a weapon around. Now, we're told that this 47-year-old woman is still in custody, and as I say, 2 men still in hospital. Police say that they're still at an early stage in the investigation, but they are reassuring the community that they believe it's an isolated mental health-related incident that happened in broad daylight in one of the tourist hotspots of the capital.
Yeah, and I think it's important, George, to underscore that London at the moment is absolutely teeming with people and teeming with young families, because, of course, it's the school holidays out there, and I've certainly been struck this week by the number of families, particularly right here in the West End, where, of course, we're broadcasting a stone's throw from Covent Garden. I mean, you know, this was risky stuff today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the police say that they responded to within minutes of getting the call that something was happening in Covent Garden. And of course, I was not there when the air ambulance landed, but it's remarkable that they were able to do that so safely and perhaps so quickly, given, you know, as you say, just how many people are sort of mulling about almost aimlessly, not with a particular direction. All of a sudden, we've got to get out of the way for a helicopter, which is going to need an awful lot of space. And indeed, eyewitnesses say that there was a sort of hush that fell around Trafalgar Square when that came in. It thankfully has returned to more normality this evening.
George Ellison, thanks very much indeed for all your work on that story today. George Ellison, LBC's reporter, who has been covering that stabbing of 4 men in broad daylight in Covent Garden, right in the centre of the West End of London, earlier today. Scott has texted the programme from West Hampstead. He says, Simon, I'm 100% behind the Thames Valley Chief Constable's comments about the killers of PC Andrew Harper, who should remain behind bars. I had 2 brothers in the police, and if anything had happened to them, I would have felt exactly the same way. Killers should not be free to roam the streets of Britain unless they have fully served their sentences. I think I echo the views of most UK citizens. Let's find out if Scott in West Hampstead echoes the views of most of the listeners to this programme tonight. If you think Andy Burnham, and we can all agree, was in a very invidious position in making this decision, is justified in saying that he has no choice, that if he keeps people like the killers of PC Harper in jail, he's going to run out of prison space even faster, and he will not be able to get out of the spiralling crisis that he absolutely, and Keir Starmer absolutely, inherited from 14 years of Conservative government. If you think Andy Burnham should not U-turn on this, because the government says he can't, I'd like to hear from you as well. You can call me at 0345 6060 973, text 84850. Coming up in a moment,
Hundreds of prison spaces are lying empty at a new prison in Yorkshire due to staffing shortages. I'm Helen Hodnott for LBC with the exclusive.
That's coming up in just a moment. But first, with the time at 7:30, Amelia Cox is here with the latest news headlines.
A former Labour MP has called the decision to offer a former neo-Nazi a role as an advisor to the Conservative Party an insult. Luciana Berger was the victim of anti-Semitic abuse from Joshua Bonehill Payne, who withdrew after being chosen as a Tory council candidate. LBC has been told hundreds of spaces are empty at a new prison in Yorkshire as thousands of offenders are due to be released early. HMP Millsike is only 3/4 full a year after being opened because of severe staff shortages. And a 35-year-old man has been remanded into custody after appearing in court charged with murdering a 9-year-old girl. Minnie Merriman was found with serious injuries at an industrial estate in Old Broth early on Monday. LBC weather tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north, clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds, a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hi, Mum. Cornwall is absolutely stunning. We love it here. Of course, our Lee thought he was too tough for sun cream and got sunburnt immediately.
Have you put on your sun cream?
He never learns. On the bright side, children's bus travel is free. So we've been riding him around everywhere to keep this lobster out of the sun. And we found this brilliant beach where we even saw a seal. Miss you tons. Love, Sally.
Enjoy great British summer savings, such as free bus travel for children this August. Funded by the UK government.
Take summer by storm with Kia. Introducing the new Kia Sportage Storm, a unique limited edition of the UK's favourite family SUV. Test drive the award-winning Kia Sportage today and order yours by the 31st of August to get 5.9% APR representative and up to £3,000 PCP finance deposit contribution. Search Kia Takes Summer by Storm.
Kia. Movement that inspires.
T's and C's apply. Kia Finance. To verify, visit kia.com/UK/favourite.
Simon Marks on LBC. Text 84850.
Or you can call 0345 6060 973. We're going to come back to our conversation about the early prison releases in just a moment. But in related news today, LBC has discovered that hundreds of prison spaces are lying empty at a new prison in Yorkshire due to severe staffing shortages, even as the government cracks on with its plans to release inmates early to deal with overcrowding. HMP Millsike has the capacity for nearly 1,500 inmates, but it is still only 3/4 full, despite opening more than a year ago. LBC's reporter Helen Hodnott is with me in the studio now. She broke that story for us. And Helen, I mean, this is a very timely moment for hearing all about this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. The race is on for more prison spaces, and here are 300 just lying dormant due to these staffing issues. So HMP Millsike was opened to great fanfare last year. It is set in rolling countryside, about half an hour's drive from York, and it is the UK's first ever all-electric prison. And Shabana Mahmood, who was the Justice Secretary at the time that it was opened, said it set the standard for the jails of the future. But despite having capacity for 1,500 inmates, the most recent figures show that it's currently holding just over 1,100, about 75% full. And while new prisons do take time to ramp up operations, Mark Fairhurst, the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association, tells me that capacity is where it's at due to severe staffing shortages.
They don't pay enough wages. It's a really dangerous jail with lots of incidents every single shift, and they can't retain staff. People are leaving as soon as they start. I would think they're probably at about 70% of their target staffing level. But because of the attrition rate, that obviously has a knock-on effect. We're hearing reports that if you recruit 30 staff who start tomorrow because they've just finished their training, by the end of next week, you'll probably only have 15 left.
So a 50% attrition rate of staff for new starters, according to Mark there. And the prison is run by the private firm Mighty Care and Custody. It is the first prison the company has ever run. And a spokesperson told me that the reduced capacity is part of a phased ramp-up plan in agreement with the Ministry of Justice. But with the government promising to build 4 new prisons and create an additional 14,000 prison spaces by 2031, staff recruitment and retention is, of course, going to be essential to achieve that. And Sam is a serving prison officer. We've changed his name and his voice. He says the prison capacity crisis in England and Wales is being exacerbated by chronically low staffing.
New jails are opening with capacities of over 1,000, and then they're not able to find the staff to run them. So they're slowly filling up. Say they've only got 50% staff, so they fill 50% capacity. Then the governors have got a decision to make. Do they continue to fill these jails with unsafe staffing levels, or do they just leave the wings empty?
So he says that without addressing staffing, the combination of increasing places and releasing inmates early will not fix the issues at the heart of the prison crisis. He says recruitment will become also more and more difficult as violence against staff is increasing.
Just recently, I can think of staff members who've been hot watered, where you get a boiling kettle, fill it full of sugar so that it sticks to the skin, and then they throw that on the officers. They do a thing called potting as well, where they fill a flask full of their own bodily fluids and then throw it over staff. Incidents like that in my first year I don't think happened, but now they're happening at least monthly.
So, yeah, really grim stuff that he's facing inside the prisons. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice has said that the government inherited a prison system in crisis, but is taking decisive action needed to restore order and protect the public, and said that while the prison service has a clear and transparent process for reducing capacity in the event of a staffing issue, the prison officer resignation rate, according to the government, is at its lowest across the estate in 5 years, saying that they are at 92% of their staffing target for frontline officers.
So just as you walked into the studio a few moments ago, one of our listeners, Paul, texted in and said, Simon, I keep hearing it's not space in prisons that's the problem, it's staffing shortages. This needs looking into. And lo and behold, you have looked into it and given us that report about HMP Millsike. But as you said, Andy Burnham says 14,000 new prison spaces by 2031, and he's going to engage in the fastest construction programme for prisons since the Victorian era. But if you can't staff them once they're built, it is inevitable that you're never going to get out of this spiral. So how do they deal with that?
Well, yeah, the message that I've heard over and over again from experts is you might build these cells, you might build the places, but it is worth absolutely nothing if you can't staff them and have the prisoners there safely. Because what you have also across the country right now, there are hundreds of empty cells, but maybe that wing is being refurbished because the building is Victorian, or maybe it's just that there are not the staff in place to safely look after prisoners on those cells. And as we were hearing there from Sam, the conditions that they're facing are volatile. He said that it feels every day sometimes for him at work like they're on the verge of rioting. And so these are the conditions that they're trying to kind of keep a handle on, and it's all about keeping prisons safe, but to have a cell doesn't mean that a prisoner can just be placed in it automatically.
LBC's Helen Hodinott with that exclusive report for us tonight. And the more you look at this in its multiple detail, the more complicated this becomes, because it's not just the prison service that is facing staffing shortages. One of the measures that the government has announced is that people that are released from prison early under this scheme are all going to be tagged with electronic tags. But the probation inspector said earlier this week that the electronic tagging system in this country is, in his words, clunky and that they need a huge influx of staff to be able to monitor all the people who are going to be wearing all of those electronic tags. So how the government can be confident that what it's announced so far is going to lead it out of this spiralling crisis, I think is a very, very big question. Let's go to Stevenage. Lewis is on the line from there. Good evening, Lewis. How are you?
Very well, Simon. First-time caller to you. Been listening for quite a few years now.
Well, lovely to have you aboard.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I really thought when I saw all of this coming along and the public pressure mounting to have these exceptions for the early release scheme, I think it would, if this does happen and there is an exception made, I think there will be a massive precedent set here that who knows where it could go, because I think once you start putting certain professions and therefore by then certain people's lives implicitly above other people, I think the question has to be asked there, what does that say about us as a country?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, do you think that the government's going to be forced into a U-turn on this?
You know, I don't think so, purely because of the numbers. You were saying about the prison in Yorkshire, about the extra capacity there, but just doing the numbers, there I was, and that would only result in a 0.4% increase in prison capacity if that extra quarter of that particular prison was opened up, even if they did find the staff. So I think people looking at numbers like that and thinking, oh, it can fix all of our problems, I think that's quite a misnomer.
But as we were saying earlier on the programme, there can't be that many people serving sentences for the manslaughter of emergency workers. I mean, we don't know the numbers, but there just can't be that many cases of people who are in the position that the killers of PC Harper find themselves in. I mean, surely they could have drawn the line somewhere else.
Well, absolutely. I just think in English common law, as you know, very heavily, and English law very heavily on precedent and things like that to do with that. So I think if we begin creating precedents, putting certain people's lives over another, there will, not in a bad way, but there will always be another person making a plea to try and get what has largely been public sympathy.
Yeah, I think that's true, but you have to draw the line somewhere. I mean, they're running out of spaces in prison. You've got to decide who's staying in and who's going. And I'm not convinced that this was as complicated a decision as they're suggesting, given the numbers of people. And it must be a relatively small number of people. I mean, for example, I don't know how many people are in jail serving manslaughter sentences for the killing of emergency workers, but do we think it's about the same number of people that might be in jail serving sentences for forgery? Or, I mean, I don't know, relatively low-level crime? There must be a way of balancing that up.
Well, absolutely. I think this goes to the question of what actually is prison for. Is it a short-term thing, or is it a way of actually protecting public safety? Because, for example, a forger, there can be other methods. So what we're looking at here is a system that was largely designed in the eras of Queen Victoria. And we're looking at that in a modern world where there are different types of crime.
So what are you advocating for, Lewis?
Well, I think really a reform to sentencing, so different types of sentencing and possibly not custodial sentences for other types of crime like financial, and really keeping the kind of public safety threats, like you say, manslaughter, murder, other types of crimes like that are direct threats to the public.
And using technology as part of that sentencing, using tagging and other technological devices as part of that sentencing.
Well, I think so. I also think that there could be other different sites. So you could have different. So we look at other places in the world. Scandinavia is often pointed out where they have economically productive prisoners who are serving time for other types of crimes.
Lewis, thanks very much indeed for calling and offering those thoughts and suggestions. That's Lewis in Stevenage. Lauren has texted in to say, families of murdered civilians do not get this level of consideration. We're only having this conversation because the police have the resources to lobby and raise the salience of this through the media. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with the police exerting this level of influence and demanding exceptions. That's an interesting point that Lauren is making. The police certainly very angry, at least in Thames Valley, where PC Andrew Harper served, over the possible release of his killers, with the Thames Valley Police Federation saying it may take legal action to force Andy Burnham to walk this back. Marge has texted in to say, I think the Prime Minister is an utter coward. He has released this, and what has he done? Gone on holiday so that he avoids any explanation of his decision. I mean, Marge, that's not actually accurate, because Andy Burnham did put out over his social media platform yesterday, or 2 days ago now, a very lengthy explanation of his decision, detailing exactly what measures he has asked his officials to look at, including the possibility of releasing more women prisoners, including the possibility of speeding up the possible deportation of foreign nationals who are serving prison sentences. And he's made it clear that this decision is not the end of the affair. There is going to be a lot more action coming as a result of the processes that he has begun. But there's also no doubt that by pausing a programme that was about to make PC Andrew Harper's killers eligible for early release, and then lifting the pause and saying, well, actually, they're still eligible for early release, I don't think he's done himself any political favours. Let me know what you think. You can call me at 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. And I just want to remind you that coming up after the news at 8 tonight, I'm going to be joined in the studio exclusively by the Green Party leader, Zach Polanski. He has issued today what he calls a reality check to Prime Minister Andy Burnham over what he calls the biggest crisis since World War II. He's talking about climate change and the toll that it has taken on the country this summer. But do you really think that it is the biggest crisis since World War II? You can listen to my interview with Zach Polanski coming up after the news at 8, and then we will dig into it together and discuss that in the next hour of the programme. You're listening to Simon Marks, in for Ian Dale on LBC, and it is now 14 minutes to 8.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Mr Burnham is facing calls from senior MPs to change course by ordering an exemption from the early release scheme for people convicted of killing an emergency worker. In the studio is Jason Hogg, Chief Constable of Thames Valley. Why are you feeling this so keenly?
So first and foremost, this is about the family of PC Andrew Harper, in the sense of injustice and unfairness by his killers at the moment are due to be released early.
Have you sought direct contact with Shabana Mahmood?
I have. I've written to the Justice Secretary and the Prime Minister.
And you've had responses?
I haven't had a response yet.
When did you send your letter to the Prime Minister and Justice Secretary?
I think it was when this first came to light about 11, 12 days ago.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Here we see a family completely asleep. No arguing, no bickering, not a peep. Remarkable. When you travel by train with Southeastern, you unlock 2-for-1 entry and great discounts at over 150 attractions across London, Kent and East Sussex, like London Zoo, the Cutty Sark and Dover Castle. Job done with 2-for-1. Terms and conditions apply. Search Southeastern Railway 2-for-1. Buy your train tickets direct and pay no booking fees.
Hey Sainsbury's, any way you can save me a few quid on my weekly shop?
Well, Jane, try Your Nectar Prices. Every week in Your Nectar app, you can unlock up to 10 personalised discounts on things you love at Sainsbury's. A Janesbury's, if you will.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Get personalised discounts with Your Nectar Prices. That's good food for all of us. Sainsbury's. 18 plus Nectar app required. Unlock up to 10 Your Nectar Prices weekly. Available in supermarkets, online and in locals with Smart Shop. T&Cs apply.
Chase gives you 2% cash back on your everyday spending.
Every day? Like Monday's train to work?
Yes.
Tuesday's big shop?
Yes again.
Wednesday's coffee treat?
Yes, cash back.
Thursday's lunch, Friday's brunch and Saturday's takeaway?
Yep, and yep.
Super.
Nothing on Sundays.
I take it easy.
Lovely. Enjoy 2% cash back on debit or credit card spending on groceries, restaurants, everyday transport and fuel. Search Chase Bank. 18 plus UK residents. Chase current and saver accounts required. Maximum £20 per month. Eligibility, qualification, exceptions and T's and C's apply.
Big Motoring World is the nation's biggest used car supermarket.
So we go big on things like peace of mind. That's why we're proud to announce we're an RAC approved dealer, and all our cars come with a free 3-month warranty and RAC breakdown cover. Drive away with peace of mind at Visit bigmotoringworld.co.uk to verify comparison and for T's and C's. Nation's biggest refers to cars in stock.
You probably think you're pretty good at multitasking behind the wheel. I mean, you have to multitask to drive. So what's wrong with checking your phone? The thing is, your brain simply for quick reply, affects your concentration, and makes you less able to react to hazards. If you use a mobile phone while driving, you're 4 times more likely to crash. Think. Put your phone away.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with Simon Marks.
And now with Paul in Camden. Good evening, Paul. What would you like to say?
Oh, good evening. It's just, I don't know, it's absolutely right, of course, but apparently there's 3,400 people serving less than 12 months. So they only serve half of that.
Sorry, what do you mean it's 3,400 people? What is 3,400 people?
3,400 people serving less than a 12-month sentence.
Currently in jail?
Currently in jail.
So what's your suggestion, Paul?
Well, if they're only serving that such a short sentence and there's such sort of spaces, regardless of the jails that have got enough staff in, and they've been trying to recruit from West Africa for years, and they've got a lot of African officers working in jails. But prisons have changed. You've got private things now, but prisons are still prisons. The estate's still the estate. But if you let the people out that are only serving a few months, which is basically weeks, let them out, and then you've got a cell.
And you would do that on the basis that if someone is serving a sentence of less than 12 months, they must have been convicted of a relatively minor crime or of a crime that was not sufficiently grave that it required them to serve a longer sentence than that. So let those people out first.
Well, they're probably a pest offence more than anything, aren't they? I mean, 12 months, if you get 12 months, you serve 6 months.
And do you think that Andy Burnham is going to be forced to engage in a U-turn over the decision specifically with regard to Andrew Harper's killers and perhaps other inmates who have been sentenced to manslaughter for killing emergency personnel, police, fire, ambulance and others? Do you think he's going to have to back down on this?
Well, according to when it first came out, he said that they was going to release sex offenders and everything, and they said no sex offenders, no paedophiles will be released. But how about all the people of domestic abuse? You've seen the people on the TV, the women that have been so distressed. And a police killer is a police killer. I know it's a long time ago, but you can go back to the Shepherd's Bush killers, where the 3 policemen were murdered. There was 2 of them in that car. They didn't actually kill anyone, but they still had to go to prison for life. But these people that are away for that murder, they show no remorse.
Well, that's also absolutely true, which is why so many people, I think, are exceedingly angry about this situation. Paul, thanks very much indeed for calling in. Remember that the killers of PC Andrew Harper are serving sentences for manslaughter, and those statistics that Paul offered up about the number of people serving short sentences, we've actually looked at the Ministry of Justice website. Between April 2025 and March of this year, the number of people jailed for between 6 to 12 months jumped from 1,200 to 3,800, so a little bit higher than Paul was suggesting there. Not 3,400, but 3,800 people. That's 3,800 people in jail for between 6 to 12 months. The government has said that this early release will see 5,000 inmates released over a 10-month rolling period, so presumably 500 people coming out every month for 10 months. Well, if there's 3,800 people as of March 26 serving between 6 and 12 months, again, it does raise questions about whether there aren't other ways of doing this that would keep killers, certainly killers of police and other frontline workers, ineligible for early release. Let's go to Glasgow. John is there tonight. John, good evening.
Good evening.
How are you tonight?
I'm much better for talking to you, my man.
Well, it's good to have you on. Just keep talking, because I'm worried your phone line's a bit uncertain. But tell us what you'd like to say, John.
So, for my mind, there's the two ways prison's supposed to work is, one, discouraging people from committing crimes by showing what could happen if you commit said crimes. The other is to rehabilitate those criminals and turn them into productive members of society. That's the way prison's supposed to work. But for me, I think there's a during the 30s and 40s, there used to be a thing called Borstal. I'm not sure if you'll remember.
I do. Absolutely. I think it went beyond the 40s. I think it was even knocking around in the 60s and 70s, wasn't it?
So what my suggestion is something like that, right? But it'll be a little bit different. So for me, what it should be doing is, say, people that commit relatively minor crimes, non-violent crimes, things of that nature, they, instead of being sent to prison, they should have to pay back in service hours, good acts to the community. So they'll also learn skills such as plumbing, metalwork, woodworking, etc. This will drastically decrease their chances of reoffending, and also help them learn a trade so they won't also feel as if they have a stake in their own communities.
Mm. So, I mean, this really requires a much more detailed approach. And Andy Burnham has said that he wants to engage in a much more detailed approach. I mean, I think there's no doubt that, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he doesn't imagine that this issue begins and ends with the announcement that he made earlier this week. But do you have any confidence that the process that he has begun is going to lead to the kind of reforms and changes that you would like to see implemented?
The problem is space. The big problem. We can't just put everybody in prison. As much as we all wanted to see criminals punished, there has to be a tier. It's just the truth. I think it's since the... We haven't really built many more prisons. So if that's the case, then how can we just, as the population grows, of course the criminal element will grow. Hopefully not. Hopefully nobody is a criminal, but we have to be realistic here.
Oh, absolutely. You've absolutely got to be realistic about all of this. John, thanks very much indeed. That was John in Glasgow. I want to go to Sophia in Stafford, who I believe is a serving prison officer. Is that right, Sophia?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, for over 10 years.
Well, I'm sure that you've got experiences that all of us would benefit from hearing about, and thoughts on this early release programme.
Yeah, I do really, to be honest, I do really want to stress that the violence in jails now is absolutely a peak point. Staff are going home injured on a regular basis. It's happened to myself. The self-harm in prison has skyrocketed since I've started the job. There's no support system at all for staff. And obviously this programme, in theory would work, but, it's looking after staff as well. It's looking after the base, going back to the base of the problem, really. I mean, we do get new staff in and, brilliant. It's amazing, but they don't last long because the job is intense. They've cut the training programme down now. So it's just, it's filling spaces, ticking boxes, but it's not for the faint-hearted, to be honest.
Sophia, how long have you been a prison officer?
Over 10 years, and I work in high security estates.
And if someone said to you they were thinking about a career in the prison service, because Lord knows the prison service needs to recruit more staff, especially if the government's going to build these 14,000 new prison places in new prisons, what would you say to someone who was thinking about following in your footsteps?
I mean, if it's something you really want to do, then I'm all about supporting people, and you don't want to ruin someone's dreams or ambitions to be a prison officer, but it's not what you see on television. The money is not good enough for every day. I mean, every day I walk into work and I'm like, is this the day that I'm not coming home? And that's a fact of that. It's been like that for the past year.
And you've been on the receiving end of violence?
Oh, absolutely. I've been stabbed, cut, I've been hot watered, I've been posited, like as you know, as like someone's bodily fluids. More times than I can count, to be honest. I mean, my body is covered in scars, and they're all from being in the prison service.
And you literally go to work every day wondering what's going to engulf you over the shift that you're about to begin.
Yeah, it's absolutely exhausting. You're dealing with so many personalities as well, so many people that have mental health problems. And obviously we don't get the training for that. We're not mental health trained. You go over a module if you would, but it's way beyond our pay grade. It's it's getting to a point now where staff, after years and years and years, are just having to leave because it's not that it causes an effect on your home life as well. You're coming home, you can't turn off, you're seeing things that you never think you're going to see, and it's horrendous, and the conditions are horrendous.
And Sophia, can I ask you roughly what kind of salary do you get paid?
So I bring on about $2,400 a month.
Well, you're worth a lot more than that, Sophia. There's no question about that. Thank you so much for calling the programme. I hope you'll call us again next time we talk about this issue, because there's lots more we could be discussing. Thanks indeed for joining us tonight. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about the heat, the drought, our food supply, and the country's readiness to do battle with all of these issues.
Today, I am sounding the alarm. We are facing the biggest threat to this country since the Second World War.
That's Green Party leader Zach Polansky delivering a reality check, he says, to the government. He says fossil fuel companies should now be required to cover the costs of firefighting helicopters that the country urgently needs. Is he on to something? Shouldn't fossil fuel producers making record profits cover the costs of climate change? Maybe even buy you some aircon? Do you really think this is the biggest crisis since the Second World War?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a former neo-Nazi with previous convictions for anti-Semitism has withdrawn as a Conservative candidate in local elections in Somerset next year. But Reform UK says it beggars belief that Joshua Bonehill Payne will advise the party on radicalisation instead. Labour peer Baroness Berger, who was the target of some of his abuse previously, has called his new role an insult. The Prime Minister's deputy, Louise Hay, says she must be listened to.
She was subject to the most horrific racially aggravated harassment, and she's spoken very powerfully about the trauma that she experienced. The judge said it was difficult to imagine a worse case of racially aggravated harassment.
LBC has learned hundreds of prison spaces are lying empty as thousands of inmates are due to be released early to ease overcrowding. HMP Millsike in Yorkshire is at three-quarters capacity because of severe staff shortages. The government is facing a growing backlash over measures to release some offenders sooner to free up space. Sam, a serving prison officer whose name and voice we've changed, has told LBC a lack of places isn't the problem.
New jails are opening with capacities of over 1,000, and then they're not able to find the staff to run them. So they're slowly filling up. Say they've only got 50% staff, so they fill 50% capacity. Then the governors have got a decision to make. Do they continue to fill these jails with unsafe staffing levels, or do they just leave the wings empty?
Ministers say they need to push ahead with the early release programme to avoid the collapse of the prison system. A man's appeared in court charged with murder following the death of a 9-year-old who was found injured in Arbroath. Minnie Merriman, who's from West Yorkshire, was discovered just after midnight on Monday at the Elliott Industrial Estate. Police are treating the stabbing of 4 men in central London as a mental health-related incident. 2 of those hurt are in hospital with injuries described as not life-threatening, while the other 2 have been discharged. A woman has been arrested. And self-driving taxis will start taking fares in London in a matter of weeks. The Ford e-cars have been granted licences, but a human driver will be behind the wheel just in case. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 8 points at 10,888. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.16. LBC weather tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north, clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds, a low of 8. Early cloud and a few showers tomorrow, turning drier with sunny spells for most later, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daisy Steele.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks.
I'm in for Ian Dale. It's great to have you with us on the radio, on your mobile. And don't forget, you can watch us tonight on the LBC official YouTube channel, Global Player, or the LBC app. This hour, we are going to talk once again tonight about the heat wave, the drought. We spoke together last night for an hour about food insecurity and whether the country now needs a strategic food reserve, especially given the fact that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. The accounting giant EY is predicting that the UK will be facing 6.4% inflation by the end of this year and a shrinking economy next year if the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz lasts until next summer. But do you think the climate change crisis constitutes the biggest crisis the country has faced since the Second World War? That is the view expressed today by Green Party leader Zach Palensky, who delivered what the party is calling a reality check to Andy Burnham, sounding the alarm about the impacts of not just the heat, but the wildfires that we've been witnessing in the Cairngorms, in Suffolk. He called for the government urgently to prioritise a comprehensive response, citing record numbers of heat-related deaths this year, calling for financial support so we can keep our homes cool, creating cool zones in every community, another politician in this country might say in every postcode, and getting fossil fuel companies to pay at least part of the bill. Specifically, he suggested fossil fuel producers should be required to fund the purchase of firefighting helicopters after it was revealed that none of Britain's 49 fire and rescue services currently has direct access to firefighting aircraft or helicopters similar to those that we've all seen on news images being used on the continent. How far do you think that idea should go? We've got oil companies making record profits as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and more broadly their activities and our use of their products continue to contribute to climate change. Shouldn't the oil companies and others foot the bill, not only for some helicopters, but what about an air conditioning system at your place? Let me know how far you think all this should go and whether you agree that climate change is now the biggest crisis the country has faced since 1945. You can call me at 0345 6060 973, same number for WhatsApp that it is for the phone. You can also text 84850. And to kick off our conversation tonight, I'm delighted to say that Zach Palensky, the Green Party leader, is with me in the studio. Mr. Palensky, welcome back to LBC. It's very good to have you here tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Can I interrogate this claim that the climate crisis is the biggest crisis since World War II? I think the climate crisis is bad. I think it's getting worse. But it's not quite on the level of the Blitz, is it? I mean, you said today that the scenes that we've seen playing out on our television screens are frankly apocalyptic. I mean, are they? Or was it just a bit of a nasty fire on some heathland in Suffolk?
I think it almost doesn't matter what a politician thinks about this. It matters what the science thinks or what the science knows. And in the last couple of months alone, we've seen 3,000 people die as a result of the extreme heat. Just yesterday, I was in Oxfordshire where I saw trees that were scorched. I saw cars burnt out. I saw local businesses decimated. In Suffolk, there was a fire. There was the equivalent of 200 football pitches. And the really important thing to know is this. We might be uncomfortable right now in the extreme heat that we've had in the past couple of weeks. Next year or the year after, It's not like it plateaus. It's not like this is the new normal. It is going to get worse and worse and worse until conditions are literally not habitable. So yes, I think this will absolutely outshadow some of the threats that we've faced since the Second World War.
But I do wonder if you're engaging in hyperbole, and particularly when you refer to that 3,000 figure relating to heat-related deaths, because that's based on a survey that has been published that is using estimates that are not based on the actual counts of deaths this year. The paper's authors say the rapid nature of this analysis precluded access to observed death counts for England and Wales. So we don't actually know that there have been 3,000 heat-related deaths in the country.
I would expect it would probably be more. And the reason for that is common sense.
But it could be much less.
Well, if you have a kidney condition or a heart condition, then excess heat, extreme heat, is not going to do you any good. If you're an older person or someone with a long-term health condition, literally struggling to breathe because of the heat, not being able to open the windows, this is all going to cause immense problems. So this is a health emergency. And actually today I was joined on stage by a former soldier, a firefighter, Chris Packham, and a doctor who was talking about how much burden this is putting on the National Health Service that is already struggling, but actually more and more people having to be admitted into A&E or to their local health service because of actually the weather and the extreme weather. It's important to say that climate change is not the weather, but what the climate crisis is doing and the burning of fossil fuels is doing is making wildfires and the extreme heat more frequent and more intense, and that will continue for years to come. What we can avoid, though, is total breakdown. And the way we do that is by reducing our emissions and stopping new drilling for oil and gas in the North Sea. But that requires the Prime Minister to take this crisis seriously. And that's exactly why I framed today as a reality check, because he became the Prime Minister during a heatwave. I don't blame him for the heatwave. He's only been Prime Minister for a month. That would be totally unreasonable, or for a couple of weeks. But it's extraordinary that there's been no emergency meeting, no national strategy, no real detail whatsoever about what he intends to do about the climate crisis of the extreme heat.
Talk to me about the extent to which you think fossil fuel companies should be on the hook to pay for a response to this. You've made the proposal that they ought to be funding the purchase of firefighting helicopters. And I have to say, I was pretty staggered to discover last week that we basically haven't got any. And the ones that we had weren't even in the UK, they were over in Cyprus. Do you want them to be paying for more than that?
Yes, well, the first thing to note is that if we had decarbonised by 2050, that would cost the government less than a single energy shock, and we've had two of them. So first of all, we know that the reliance on oil and gas is not leaving us with any energy security, and energy security is national security. So ultimately, we need to invest in renewables, wind, solar and tidal. We need to move away from fossil fuels. That being said, BP has doubled its profits during the Iran war. Barclays, its profits have gone up by a third, and we know that they've been advising clients to profiteer off the extreme heat. These are companies who are behaving grotesquely, incredibly irresponsibly, and I think there's a conversation to be had of should they be making a single penny's profit at the same time as we're seeing parts of our countryside on fire and people struggling to have spaces that are habitable. This is before we even mention wildlife, by the way. Wildlife rarely gets a look in here, but actually that's being decimated by the fires as well. So ultimately, I think the fossil fuel companies are responsible, and I think rather than making excess and record profits, we should be using that money and using it both for wildfire prevention and also to fund a fire service that is badly struggling.
And in what form would that requirement on the fossil fuel companies to come up with the ready cash take? I mean, you'd put a toll on them, you'd tax them. How would you do that?
Well, I think the first thing to say, and it's not about tax actually, is to remove fossil fuel subsidies. At the moment, we give fossil fuel companies £2.7 billion every year in tax breaks. That makes no sense. There's some of the wealthiest companies around that are making record profits. Why are the government subsidising them? Second, there already is a windfall tax, that's true, but it's only in place till 2030. Again, that doesn't make any sense. Let's make it permanent right now. And then finally, I think it's about closing some of the loopholes that there are around the windfall tax, where far too often the oil and gas companies are getting away with not paying up.
And when you talk about creating free, accessible, cool spaces in every local area, What are you talking about? Are you talking about, for example, making sure that every public library's got air conditioning so people can go and hang out there during a particularly hot day? What does that look like?
That's right. This is something that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, I think is doing well. He has something called a cool spaces map, which means that anyone in London can have a look on a very, very hot day where they can go to cool down. Now, London is an exception in this, and it's not happening around the rest of the country, and I do hope that there's some more in London as well. There's some places that have lots of cool spaces and some that have less so. But it's really, really important that if people are living in homes that are overheated and they need somewhere to go, and the park is too hot sometimes, to actually have a space where people who are vulnerable or older or just want to cool down have a space they can go and actually breathe.
We've only got you for a few minutes. Can I ask you about some other issues in the news?
Sure.
We've talked in the last hour of the programme about early prison releases. Do you think that the government should make Harper's Law retroactive, or in some other fashion find a way of keeping PC Andrew Harper's killers in prison?
I do think it's important that where people have committed heinous crimes, they are kept in prison. I think we need to look at a holistic view of this. We're putting far too many people in prison. I've talked a lot, for instance, about needing to legalise and regulate drugs. It doesn't make sense that people are going into prison for small drug offences. I'm also very concerned about women in prison. The vast majority of women are in prison for non-violent crimes. Some of them are in prison for stealing nappies or baby food. Now, I want everyone to obey the law, but ultimately I think people accept that if people are living in poverty and that they steal something for their baby, then that's an effective austerity in poverty rather than something they should be in prison for. Now, the reason why that matters is if we're putting less people in prison, there'll be more prison spaces, it'll be less overcrowded, and it'll be a much more obvious choice to say that people who are dangerous to the public should be kept in prison.
But what would you do about the killers of PC Harper?
Well, in the details of that, that's ultimately going to be up to the judicial system, and I don't think it's helpful when politicians wade into individual cases. But I think I've made the principle clear that where someone is a danger to society, if someone's murdered someone, then that's clearly falls into that category, then it doesn't make sense to have this early release. It's also a lot of audacity for Kemi Badenoch when she comes from a Conservative party that for 14 years have pushed for prisons into overcrowding, committed austerity and not protected prison officers. I think it's a little grotesque to see her wading into this conversation.
But you wouldn't necessarily support a change in the law to make Harper's Law retroactive?
Well, I don't think it should ever be about one particular individual case, but I do think it's about the principle. And the principle is that we are letting people out of prison who are not safe to society because of austerity, because we can't afford to. That's an absurd place for the government to have got themselves into. We hear constantly there's no money left, but the 50 wealthiest families in this country own more wealth than 34 million people. Let's use some of that wealth and actually fund our public services, including prisons.
I'd like to ask you about Joshua Bonehill-Payne, who has withdrawn today from his quest to become a Conservative member of Somerset Council. This is, of course, the former neo-Nazi, claims to be a former neo-Nazi. Do you think Kemi Badenoch has got things wrong by keeping him on in an advisory capacity to the Conservative Party?
Well, the judgment just seems a little bit incoherent. These were grotesque anti-Semitic remarks that he's made, more than grotesque, literally a neo-Nazi. Now, I've said today, and I do believe that people can rehabilitate. I've looked into more details of this particular individual, and actually he often creates AI videos, including of myself, that I would say are in pretty distasteful, and not just of myself, but other political leaders as well. And so I think there's a question of judgment here about, yes, people can rehabilitate, and I think it is important that there's space for people to say sorry, but not just say sorry, actually show they're making amends. But I would say current behaviour also suggests that there's lots of questions about this particular individual.
And can I ask you finally about Jason Arday, Cambridge Professor of Sociology and Education. Back on July the 30th, you signed an open letter in support of him, saying that there was an orchestrated and grim effort to delegitimise a young working-class academic for the sin of being successful while black. Today, the University of Cambridge launched an investigation into Professor Arday after growing credibility questions, allegations that more than 100 passages in his 2015 PhD closely resembled an earlier thesis, Glasgow and Ohio State saying he never held the visiting professorships that were attributed to him on his Cambridge biography, Cambridge removing reference to an additional master's degree. Do you still stand by him?
Well, I don't know, Jason. And the reason why I signed that letter is ultimately it was saying that we should have a fair process, that the university should have a fair investigation, and that this shouldn't be judged by social media or by the Telegraph newspaper, or indeed people who have been accused of racism in the past who are pointing accusations at Jason. I support what Cambridge are doing. I think where there are questions to be asked, and of course people should be investigated.
And I've just heard that while we've been on the air, Jason Arday has resigned from the University of Cambridge with immediate effect. So what's your reaction to that?
I think the whole affair sounds pretty sad. Again, I think it would be good actually if the investigation still was carried out, because I think it would be good to know the truth. But ultimately, I think these things should be about fair process and transparency rather than trial by media.
And I've got to ask you, should you have known more about him before you signed that letter?
No, the letter was about principles, and the principles was about the university being able to conduct an investigation if it needed to. It had already done, I think, 2 investigations and found there was no problem here, or the allegations were unfounded. And so it was about essentially saying that people of colour, particularly in society, can sometimes be held by higher standards. Now, it might be that he has plagiarised or he's not conducted himself properly, and the investigation would reveal that. But I think it's important that there are investigations, that those are transparent, and that those happen before the media come for individuals, which we've seen over and over again.
And finally, for listeners who are curious about what you announced today with regard to climate change, but who don't buy the argument that this is the greatest crisis that the country has faced since World War II, how would you persuade them that it is?
Well, I think even if you don't consider that true, tackling the climate crisis doesn't have to be some kind of sacrifice. Actually, it's ways of lowering bills, of making sure that we have investment in new jobs, in a new green economy. It's ways of making sure that we are mobilising this country to really get behind a central mission, which is clean, green energy. We need to do that because of the climate crisis. But to be honest, it's full of benefits anyway. So whether you agree with the assessment or not, it's very clear that this is something that Andy Burnham should be getting on board with.
And finally, were you comfortable? You're talking about climate change. You're talking about issues that are central to the history of the Green Party. And there are many people that will say, well, often you haven't been talking about the climate crisis. You've been talking about other things as you've moved the party further to the left in your leadership. Was it comfortable today to you, sort of coming home to those issues? Do you regret not talking about them more earlier?
I've actually been talking about the climate crisis ever since the day I was elected as leader. And what's striking today is that despite the fact I announced a press conference, the BBC just didn't mention it at all during their news broadcast. It feels when Nigel Farage runs a press conference, there's an hour conversation beforehand about what he's about to say, then they run it live and then they talk about it afterwards. The Guardian criticised all political parties just a few days ago, saying no one was talking about the heat wave. That, first of all, wasn't true. I've been talking about the heat wave a lot. And second, they haven't, as of time of recording, mentioned the press conference at all today. So I think there's a wider issue in the media about not talking about the climate crisis and heat wave. So commendation to you and LBC for doing an hour about it. It's the most important issue of our time, and it's important that the media are talking about it.
Well, we are going to talk about it for the rest of the hour. Thank you very much indeed for coming in tonight and being game with 3 finally questions there. That, of course, is Zach Polansky, leader of the Green Party. Your views on his claim that we are facing the greatest crisis since the end of World War II. And I'm particularly interested in your views about Zach Polansky's plan to get fossil fuel companies to pay for at least some of the costs of this crisis, specifically by funding the acquisition of firefighting aircraft and helicopters. Do you think that's a good idea? Is that a fair requirement for fossil fuel companies that, let's face it, are coining it as a result of the war on Iran? 0345 6060 973 for the phones and WhatsApp, 84850 for texts. It's 22 minutes past 8.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m.
Zach Polansky says the hot weather is the biggest threat Britain's faced since the Second World War. Is that a bit much, or is he right? Plus, a former neo-Nazi stands down as a Tory council candidate despite insisting he's changed. And talking of holding people to account, the police watchdog has dropped its investigation into the officer who shot dead Chris Cabba. We'll look at whether our police need more protection.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Us kids are mesmerised by the mundane, entranced by the everyday. Where grown-ups see a snail, we see a slippery shelled beast from the undergrowth. but around 1 in 5 young children have a sight condition that can get in the way of all that wonder. The good news is, if these are found early, they can be managed or corrected. So book your child a free eye test at Specsavers today. Find out more at specsavers.co.uk/kids tests.
Take Irish ferries from Dover to Calais, where your pet travels in the pet lounge. You'd be barking not to. Irish ferries. See travel differently.
Everything cake at Ocado. We've got birthday cakes, Jaffa cakes, pancakes, fish cakes, rice cakes, oat cakes. Basically, you can have your cake and eat it, as well as non-cakey stuff. At Ocado, the online supermarket. Give us a try and get 25% off the food in your first shop and free delivery. Geographical and other restrictions apply. New customers only. Min spend £60. Max saving £20. Charges apply. Terms at ocado.com.
Look, there's a snail, and its eyes are sticking out of its antlers. It looks like an ice cream.
Ella sees a lot more than just a snail. With free kids' glasses from Specsavers, plus a second pair from £10, they'll see a world of wonders. And you'll see a great deal too. So book them an appointment at Specsavers today for free. £10 second pair with free glasses from our £65 and above range.
Conditions apply. See online for details.
Simon Marks on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
Just going to come back to that breaking news that we received while I was talking to Zach Polanski, literally while I was talking to him about this letter of support that he signed backing Jason Arday, Cambridge's Professor of Sociology of Education, who's been facing a widening credibility crisis and has now resigned. It is just worth underscoring that previous investigations by Liverpool John Moores University found that Jason Arday did not intentionally plagiarise. There is, as Mr. Polanski was saying, an investigation underway. We will see what that new investigation finds with regard to his time at Cambridge, but certainly he has announced over his own website this evening that he has departed Cambridge, and Mr. Polanski, who had signed that open letter of support of Jason Arday, indicated that he had never met Jason Arday and didn't know him personally. The quote from Jason Arday on his website: "I have a family. I want to be present for them. I want to reclaim some peace, some privacy, and some semblance of an ordinary life. I no longer wish to feel as though I am living under a constant spotlight where every aspect of my life is subject to public examination and judgment." Let's move to our conversation about the heat, the drought, food insecurity, and the proposals that Zach Polanski put forward today. This reality check that he says he's delivered to Andy Burnham over what he calls the biggest crisis the country has faced since World War II. Michael is in West Hampstead. Michael, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, I just wanted to say I just happened to stumble on the fact that Zach was your guest just as I was clearing up the dinner things. And, of course, what I wanted to do was to go in and watch a mindless repeat of some game show on television. But actually, because that's what we all want to do, faced with the actual reality of what's happening to the planet. And I thought, I'll go in and watch television because it's an easier option than actually phoning. But I thought, actually, no, people have got to start speaking up. And I think Zach has absolutely hit it on the nail. And although I know your job obviously is to balance things, I think the fact that he might be using hyperbole is frankly it's not disrespectful, but it doesn't reflect the truth and the profundity of what Zach, I think, is trying to say. The point I want to make simply is that it seems to me that climate change is indeed the most cataclysmic thing that humanity is facing. And I mean, if it goes on as some of the experts are predicting it's going to happen, it's going to make World War II look like a teddy bear's picnic. I was very struck. I read the testimony recently of a GP from Barnstable who was had up in court for joining Extinction Rebellion because he felt he had to make some gesture about the fact that so many of the people he was treating were dying from the effects of heating and climate change. And in it, this young GP made the most telling sentence, and I won't go on much longer, but he said in his testimony to court, he said, "The planet, our only home, is on fire." And that seems to me what's happening. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how on earth we're going to solve it. But what I do know is that unless we start taking this seriously, the planet isn't doomed, but humanity could be doomed.
Michael, I agree with much of what you've said, but I do wonder about the use of hyperbole. I mean, to talk about this as being the biggest crisis since World War II, to say that the wildfires that we've seen in the Cairngorms and across some heathland in Sussex last week, that those images were frankly apocalyptic. My concern about that is that by using such overly dramatic language, you may actually be playing into the hands of climate change skeptics. And isn't it better to have a really straightforward and honest conversation with the country where you say, this is really bad, we're getting these heat waves now year on year, and this year has been chronically bad. There is no question that there have been heat-related deaths. We don't know really that there have been 3,000 of them or that records have been broken. But what we do know is if we don't grip this issue and do something about it, then we are indeed going to be conveyed into a crisis that is worse than World War II. I just wonder if hyperbole is useful.
Well, I suppose what I would counter that, Ben, respectfully, is by saying, look at what's happening to Southern Europe. What's happening to Southern Europe now would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. I used to go to Corfu, I still go to Corfu, but now, it's common knowledge that everybody's habits are changing on holidays because people are starting to get to the point where they daren't go to Mediterranean countries in high summer, where 5 years ago that would have been an unthinkable. So the point I'm making, Ben, is it's the speed of it that's happening. You saw the fires in America. You've seen the fires in Australia. And I suppose, without enlarging this subject too much, what I would say is that, we talk about economic migration, the fact that it's very difficult to keep the country's borders. But, once countries become unlivable in Africa and in India and Asia because of the heat, it's going to be an unstoppable influx, quite rightly, because people are not going to be able to live where once they dwelt. So, I mean, that would really be my only point. I do think that we are sleepwalking into disaster, and it seems to me that Zach, if nothing else, is trying to say, wake up. The house is on fire. You haven't got time to start thinking about how you might put it out. We've got to do something.
And Michael, the other thing that he said in our interview a little bit earlier, about which I think he is absolutely right, is it seems jarring to me, and I don't know whether other listeners agree with me. I think you will, but I don't know whether others do. It seems jarring to me that a new Prime Minister can come into office in the middle of a massive heat wave, in the middle of a major drought, in the middle of some fires in the Cairngorms and also in Sussex, some pretty serious scenes, and have absolutely nothing to say about it. I mean, I don't think Andy Burnham's addressed the issue. I'm willing to be corrected, but I don't think he's addressed the issue at all since he became Prime Minister. And that's curious to me.
Well, I would agree with you, Ben, but I suppose I would say, let's give the guy a break. He's just assumed the prime ministership of the country. He's got an in tray as high as the Empire State Building, and if you put that suggestion to me in 3 or 4 months' time, I would absolutely heartily agree with you, because as I've said, I do think it has to be top of the agenda. But at the moment, I'm still willing to give the guy a couple of weeks' grace. My final point I would like to say, and I mean, all of us have got friends in high. All of us claim to have friends in high places who we can't quote verbatim. But I have got a friend that I have a social interest with, and I speak to her on Zoom. She happens to be very high up in the United Nations in the environmental department, and she has said to me the thing that we daren't tell everybody is the fact that the emissions from which we are now suffering the consequences only go up to about 1930. We've still got, she says, nearly 100 years of emissions that are still working their way through the system. So, it's not like what we did in the 1970s is now having the effect. We're still really suffering the effects of the early part of the last century. If that's true, how frightening is that?
Michael, thanks very much indeed for calling. That's Michael in West Hampstead. I will hope that we'll speak with you again on this issue, and definitely let's get back together in 2 or 3 months and see whether Andy Burnham has addressed it in detail, see whether he rises to the challenge that Zach Polansky has delivered to him today, what he calls a reality check to Andy Burnham over what the Green Party is arguing is the biggest crisis since World War II. What do you think? Call me at 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. Coming up...
Mr Miliband, do you still think the President is an idiot, a racist and a misogynist? Sir, do you still hold a dim view of the President and does it hamper your business? We're looking forward to our meeting.
Those were the questions being levelled at the Foreign Secretary Ed Miliband today as he arrived in Washington for a meeting with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the State Department. We will discuss what that meeting was all about and what it may or may not have achieved. Coming up after the latest LBC headlines at 8:33 from Daisy Steele.
A former Labour MP has called the decision to offer a former neo-Nazi a role as an advisor to the Conservative Party an insult. Luciana Berger was the victim of anti-Semitic abuse by Joshua Bonehill Payne, who withdrew after being chosen as a Tory council candidate. LBC has been told hundreds of spaces are empty at a new prison in Yorkshire as thousands of offenders are due to be released early. HMP Millsike is only 3/4 full, a year after being opened because of severe staff shortages. A man's appeared in court charged with murder following the death of a 9-year-old who was found injured in Arbroath. Minnie Merriman, who's from West Yorkshire, was discovered just after midnight on Monday at the Elliott Industrial Estate. LBC weather tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north, clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds. A low of 8.
LBC.
BetMGM Casino is backed by over 50 years of Las Vegas heritage. And if it's taught us anything about jackpots, it's that bigger is always better. Sign up now at BetMGM Casino and play for the UK's biggest online casino jackpot. Over £40 million. BetMGM Casino, the real deal. Verify at betmgm.co.uk. Minimum 10p stake. Minimum jackpot stake of 9p. T's and C's apply. 18 plus. Please gamble responsibly.
Imagine sweeping through green fields, floating 5 feet above ground. Sun on your face as you slide by on track to your destination. Not a care in the world as you simply lean back. And before you know it, you're there. This is how travel should feel. And on our trains, it does. Avanti West Coast. Feel good travel.
This is LBC with Simon Marks.
More of your calls on Zach Polansky's efforts today to force the government's hand on climate change. We'll get to those in just a moment. Lots of texts coming in as well off the back of my interview with the Green Party leader. But first, Ed Miliband, the Foreign Secretary, is in Washington. He's held his first face-to-face meeting at the State Department with Marco Rubio. They did meet briefly on the fringes of an ASEAN summit in the Philippines last month. But this meeting today is a very big deal. The conventional wisdom going into it suggested the Foreign Secretary was going to be on the back foot. Why? Because President Trump made it clear he didn't particularly care for Mr. Miliband's selection as Foreign Secretary. One Trump backer recently described the former Energy Secretary, now Foreign Secretary, as a nut zero extremist, known in Washington for all the wrong reasons. But I'm not sure I share the conventional wisdom. The UK has successfully navigated these shoals before. Former Foreign Secretary David Lammy once called Trump a tyrant and a woman-hating neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, and he had a warm and productive relationship with Marco Rubio and even went trout fishing at Chevening with Vice President J.D. Vance. And speaking of J.D. Vance, he once compared Trump to Adolf Hitler. So I wonder what the dynamic of that meeting was all about and whether Ed Miliband might have been the one on the front foot And Marco Rubio should have been the one feeling a little bit sheepish about the meeting, given the extraordinary damage that Donald Trump's war on Iran is already doing to the UK's economy and undoubtedly will continue doing the longer it goes on. Let's find out what Ambassador Philip T. Rieker thinks of all of this. He's a former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, serving in the first Trump and Biden administrations, and then Ambassador to the UK from 2021 to 2022. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Wilson Centre in Washington, D.C., and joins us live from Washington tonight here in London, this afternoon there on the other side of the Atlantic. Ambassador Rieker, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I mean, I see that a relatively anodyne readout has been issued by the State Department spokesperson saying the two men met. They discussed the importance of Europe taking on a greater role in its own security. They reiterated their shared commitment to safe transit in the Strait of Hormuz and ensuring Iran never develops or obtains a nuclear weapon. I mean, that doesn't tell us very much. What do you think the mood music was like in that room? And do you agree that Ed Miliband should have viewed himself as being on the front foot in that interaction with the Secretary of State? Good afternoon to you there.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks very much for having me. Always good to be back with LBC. Yes, I think that statement, anodyne, is one word for it. It was probably written before the meeting took place, might have been written before Mr. Miliband even got on the plane. That's the nature of this work. Look, I think some of the press stories and the questions shouted out by reporters, of course, are frankly verging on the silly. It's important to have these meetings. The U.S. and the U.K. are really the closest of allies, despite difficult times. We've been through these before, and everybody knows that dealing with the Trump administration is not easy on anyone, particularly a government that has a different political bent, and certainly that's the Labour government in the UK, different from the Donald Trump government, and Ed Miliband, a different character than Marco Rubio. To the question of the Foreign Secretary's comments at some point about President Trump, as you pointed out, look at what J.D. Vance said about President Trump as a candidate and earlier. Look at what Marco Rubio himself said about him. I don't think there was any discussion about the size of hands or anything else in this meeting. It looks to me as if they talked about the key issues, one of them being, as you said, the war against Iran, this ongoing military action. We're now many months into what was supposed to be a short detour, as the president described it, when he launched with the Israelis these attacks. That's crucial for everybody, for global supply chains, for the economy, energy supplies, and general stability overall. There's also Ukraine, the bigger picture of what to do about Russia, the euro and the transatlantic security, the forced posture that is undergoing in the U.S. right now in terms of the U.S. military presence in Europe. The U.K. has a big stake in that as well. And frankly, there's a global agenda. So it's important that these meetings take place person to person. And I suspect that the two men, they're professionals, they're diplomats, they're public officials. They've both been elected to office, parliamentarians. They know how to engage and interact.
So Ed Miliband has put his own statement out, his own readout about the meeting, and it's starkly different to the anodyne couple of sentences we got from C Street. He says, of course, the UK and the US are the closest of allies, bound by culture, history and interests, and our shared commitment as NATO allies. But then he goes on to say, we discussed the vital importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which is essential to protecting British families and businesses on the cost of living, this government's number one priority. He was walking through the doors at the State Department today, 48 hours after EY, the accounting firm, predicted that inflation in this country is going to reach 6.4% by the end of this year, unless the Strait of Hormuz blockade ends, and that next year the British economy is going to shrink at exactly the moment that Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister, is desperate to find a path to growth. Shouldn't European governments at this point, including our own, be much more forthright, as Mr. Miliband has been in that statement, about saying to the Trump administration, get this sorted. This is causing massive dislocation to the people who live in your European allied nations on the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I think your point is exactly right. And of course, Mr. Miliband is speaking on behalf of his constituents, the British people, part of the government that is in place to represent their interests. And those interests are primarily economic. Frankly, I think Mr. Rubio probably wants to pay a little more attention to that himself. The issues in the United States come down to the economy, inflation, gas prices, petrol. I filled my tank just this last weekend, and not quite $5 a gallon at this point, but again, very high. This was something the president campaigned on, bringing these prices down. This is what people need to see. Now, whether appealing to the interests and needs of allies is something that is going to affect the Trump administration, at least publicly and in their statements, anodyne or otherwise, that is a question that I think we've seen repeatedly. Doesn't matter. But what goes on behind private doors in these meetings is important. And I'm sure Mr. Miliband had a chance to pass on those concerns to Secretary Rubio and hear his concerns as well. This is costing the United States as well. It's very destabilizing to the whole world. We've heard repeatedly that this is over or just about to be over. The strait is open. The strait is closed. The Iranians have agreed. There's a deal. There's not a deal. Every day there seems to be a new narrative.
Do you think that Donald Trump and arguably Marco Rubio have the maturity and the patience to get a deal done with Iran?
Well, I think they have it. It's a question of whether they do. Now, the challenge here, Simon, is that the Iranians are remarkably good negotiators. Whether that's in the way that others like to negotiate is beside the point. They have their approach. And from my experience at the State Department and with those who have been involved with Iran before, it takes months and months, years even, to understand how the Iranians are approaching something. They're very good at making a pretty good hand out of very poor cards. And we've seen them pounded militarily. We've seen all kinds of challenges. It's a society, 80-some million people, let's remember, that is suffering in many ways. And yet they have become more determined to play well the cards that they do have. And that requires expertise. And I have to say we've lost a lot of the expertise and experience. And so I think it's an important moment for Secretary Rubio and for the special envoys from President Trump's cabinet to really focus on how they can get out of this and do the best for American interests. And that will, of course, reflect well for our allies as well.
Ambassador Rika, thanks so much for your time this afternoon there in Washington, D.C. Former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, then U.S. Ambassador to the U.K., now a Distinguished Fellow at the Wilson Centre in Washington, D.C. We're going to return to your calls about my interview earlier this hour with Zach Polanski. Nadia in Hastings welcomes the fact that Mr. Polanski was talking about climate change. She says, well said, Zach. Glad to hear you talking about green issues. Kieran in Leicester says it doesn't matter what we do about climate change. While China and India continue to build coal-fired power plants, whatever we do, he says, is irrelevant, which is really echoing the argument that former Prime Minister Tony Blair was making just a few weeks ago. Join me at 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and we'll continue to lead Britain's conversation on this issue of climate change. It's coming up to 8:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Mr Burnham is facing calls from senior MPs to change course by ordering an exemption from the early release scheme for people convicted of killing an emergency worker. In the studio is Jason Hogg, Chief Constable of Thames Valley. Why are you feeling this so keenly?
So first and foremost, this is about the family of PC Andrew Harper and the sense of injustice and unfairness by his killers at the moment are due to be released early.
Have you sought direct contact with Shabana Mahmood?
I have. I've written to the Justice Secretary and the Prime Minister.
And you've had responses?
I haven't had a response yet.
When did you send your letter to the Prime Minister and Justice Secretary?
I think it was when this first came to light about 11-12 days ago.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
A message from TfL for drivers, motorcyclists and cyclists. Before you turn, look around. Is there someone crossing or waiting to cross at the junction? You now need to always let them cross before you turn. Follow the highway code to keep everyone safe. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
From countryside escapes to seaside breaks, and plenty of open roads in between, there's a Mazda for every kind of summer. Get 0% APR on selected models when ordered by the 30th of September, and keep your mind on the really important stuff, like trying to eat that ice cream before it melts. Search Mazda. Available on PCP when financed by Mazda Financial Services by the 31st of December 2026. Indemnities may be required. Terms apply. See website.
Honestly, I've been putting MTD off. First it was, I'll do it after this job. Then, after some grouting. After sorting the back of the van. After fish fingers and peas. And then I thought, no, just get it done.
Get MTD done simply with Sage for free. Just connect to your bank, we'll sort your transactions, then submit your update to HMRC. Search Sage MTD.
Simon Marks on LBC. Text 84850.
Let's go to Leamington Spa. Francis is there this evening. Francis, good evening. Welcome to the programme. I'm sure you heard the interview that we did with Zach Polanski. Your views on his assertion that climate change is the biggest crisis since World War II. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi. Yes, I 100% agree with him, and I wish he was speaking even more stridently, because I would say that fossil fuel subsidies should go towards transitioning to renewables right now. We are killing our children's future and our grandchildren's future. It's no good talking about 2050. What is happening now? We said decades ago that feedback loops are going to exacerbate the situation. So we really need to change our lifestyle, and it's got to be worldwide. Of course, it's not just us, and it's no good talking about China because we import stuff from there. But everybody needs to look and start pushing and look at the 4 Billion Dead website, which explains a bit more about how important it is for everybody to step up. We cannot, our lifestyle cannot continue like this. As we're seeing, people's livelihoods are being burnt to the ground or flooded, and this is just going to happen on a bigger and bigger scale.
Francis, Francis, are you a Green voter?
No, I'm not actually. But I'm glad to hear, because I want system change. I would like to see a House of the People, and by using citizens' assemblies, because I don't believe in the political system. It gets chained to large corporations and keeping them afloat. And this is absolutely drastic. They'll continue sort of coming up with whizzy ideas like carbon capture. That's another distraction. We are still creating the problem, and that's what we've got to address now, seriously.
And are you disappointed that you've not heard anything yet from Andy Burnham about climate change? And look, I'm the first to say I understand he's only been in the job for just over a fortnight, but he has taken power at a pretty extraordinary moment in terms of what the country is enduring. And I thought right from the get-go, it was slightly curious to me that he didn't make a reference to the heat wave or the drought or prioritising this. And yeah, I accept he's 2.5 weeks into the job, but were you surprised not to have heard anything from him?
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't listen to all the politicians or what he said, but I gather that he hasn't addressed it, and I'm 100% with you. It's like this is the most crucial thing in the world right now. People sort of question the figures. That's irrelevant. We've known that millions of people have been dying over more and more every single day, and it's just not being reported anymore, is it? And now it's actually happening in this country, and people are sort of sitting up and wondering, and yet I mean, we're expanding the sort of Heathrow Airport, and we're building HS2. It's all absolute madness. We need to be addressing the problem now. And if more people stood up, and as I say, all I can think of at the moment is the website 4 Billion Dead, because it's pointing in the right direction. It's simply asking in a non-violent way to try and get the government to recognise that something dramatic has to change.
Francis, I appreciate your input and your passion. Thanks very much for bringing it to the programme tonight. I will just reiterate that those numbers that are being bandied around, about 3,000 people having died in the UK of heat-related deaths this summer, are absolutely not real numbers. I mean, the authors of that study say that the rapid nature of their analysis precluded access to observed death counts. These are estimates that are not based on actual counts of deaths this year. And I think that's important, because when we sit here and talk about record-breaking numbers of heat-related deaths, we don't actually know that's the case. And that's why I do worry slightly about the hyperbole that Mr. Polanski used, but I understand why he felt like he needed to use it to get some public attention. Let's go to Croydon. Miles is there. Evening, Miles.
Yeah, evening. I mean, your point just then about these excess deaths from heat. I mean, we have had extreme heat across Europe this summer. My mother's 90, in her 90s, and it does affect, it's well-known fact that heat does have a big impact on elderly and weaker people, people who are sick. And there are excess deaths. As to the number, we don't know. But to suggest that it's a fake number suggests that it's a fake issue. It's not a fake issue.
Well, I'm not suggesting, Miles, I'm not suggesting it's a fake number. The authors of the study are it's the authors of the study who are saying it's not a real number. They're saying that the rapid nature of this analysis precluded access to observed death counts for England and Wales. So they didn't see numbers. They've and look, I'm not denying the issue at all. Yeah. I'm asking the question whether it's helpful in an environment in which, and there are people texting the programme tonight, there are still people out there who are in denial about the nature of the threat. I wonder if you're not feeding into that narrative a bit by making numbers up.
I mean, another piece of data that I heard this morning on my way to work was on the radio, agricultural sector, was on the radio saying that they have had something like a 30% drop in yield, the lowest yields they've had in the UK since the Second World War.
Yep, we talked about it on the programme last night.
And I believe it's the third year in a row. Now, that's real, because that is our economy, that is our food we eat. And if we're suffering from that in the UK, where we have infrastructure and we have the ability to adapt agriculture, imagine what it's like for the hundreds of millions of people in Africa, in areas that are getting hit even harder, where you've got desertification. Yeah. So this is the real world of what we've been told by the scientists for at least 20 years, more, is going to happen if we continue to pump oil and gas. And what we have done, and what politicians who have been in the pockets of people who make money out of oil and gas have persuaded us, some of us, to continue on that road. In fact, even today, we have politicians in major parts in the UK saying we need to pump more and more oil and we need to stop building wind turbines. It's a complete nonsense. There's no intellect there in terms of doing what is right for ourselves and others on this planet and our future generations. And it's an absurdity of humanity that we, in millions and millions, we listen to these absurd situations when the evidence is in our faces today and has been told to us for decades along.
I could not agree with you more, Miles. And let me say something else, which is that the first time I became aware of the issue of climate change was actually thanks to this radio station. As long ago as 1986, LBC aired what I think was its first ever documentary. It was called Our Changing Climate, and I listened to it when it went out on the air and thought, hang on a second, what's that all about? 1986, and here we are 40 years later having this conversation and dealing with the kind of summer conditions that we've all lived through. Miles, thank you very much indeed for calling the programme. Let's go to Fiona in Kendal, up in Cumbria. And Fiona, I believe you are a former spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Good evening.
I am indeed. And we did try. We tried our best, Simon. And could I just say thank you for all the fantastic reporting you do from America.
Oh, well,
I
thank you.
love your report.
Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to be cheeky, though, having complimented you. I think you need to go to a national emergency briefing. Have you heard of it? Chris Packer has organised it. And my feeling is the media, including your good self, don't really grasp the full horror. So that when somebody like Zach Polanski comes on, you're not really ready for it. Can I urge you to not only do the national emergency briefing, but also read the Institute of Actuaries and Insurers report? Because in a weird article The Guardian ran a couple of years ago, they covered one of their reports, which predicts 4 billion dead. Now, those are the actuaries and insurers. Now, they're not a group of, just stop oil campaigners. They're not a group of green MPs, or they are the insurers and actuaries who predict what is going to happen to our economy. The Guardian chose to highlight what's going to happen to our economy, which is disastrous. This is going to absolutely blast through our economy. You know how you were urging that in that last interview you ran, you were saying, isn't Ed Miliband going to say this, and isn't Ed Miliband going to say that? Well, that's what Zach Polanski's trying to do. He's trying to say we are absolutely up against it, and we're not only going to lose thousands of people and heat-related deaths, we're going to lose businesses in the floods. We're going to lose anything secure about our lives, including our economy. So please, would you read the Institute of Actuaries and Insurers report, the one that says they're predicting 4 billion deaths by 2050.
It will be my bedtime reading tonight, Fiona. I never imagined I'd be heading to the Institute of Actuaries website, but I will get all over it. Very briefly, how hard do you want Andy Burnham to go on fossil fuel companies with Zach Polanski's idea that they should be paying at the very least for aircraft and helicopters?
Thank you so much for asking me that question. I consider it absolutely outrageous that Andy Burnham, who has come in with this idea of being, the person who's going to protect us and look after us and defend us, and yet he is considering opening Jackdaw and Rosebank when we should be sending a message to the rest of the world. We might have this whole 1% thing that everybody talks about, but we've been doing it for 150 years. That's why America and the UK are rich, because we've been pumping this rubbish into the air for 150 years. So now it's about time the fossil companies, polluter pays. They are making record profits. They have to be, whatever way, taxed. They have to be. They have to stop. We have to stop them in their tracks. We have to stop investing in them. We have to stop giving them tax breaks. We have to make them pay for the damage they've done and that they've known they were doing. Because you mentioned the 1986 LBC program. Yep. Can I mention to you that ExxonMobil told the American government they knew where this was heading in the 70s?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like the cigarette manufacturers, isn't it, in that regard? Fiona, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. That's Fiona up in Kendal in Cumbria, a former spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. I want to end with a text from Dave, who accuses me of being hugely disrespectful to the authors of the report about heat-related deaths in the UK. Dave says the true number could easily turn out to be greater than 3,000. You are sounding, this is me, you're sounding like a climate denier in the way you attempt to rubbish the report. I'm not a climate change denier, Dave. I'm not rubbishing the report. I'm just telling you what the authors of the report themselves are saying. They are conceding that these numbers were not based on actual death counts. And I think it's important that the conversation remains fact-based. Enjoyed that hour. Hope you did too. Into our next hour, TfL today granted the first minicab licences to a fleet of driverless cars. They will, for now, be required to have a human safety driver on board, but I think we all know where that's going. Would you get into a fully driverless taxi? If you're a cabbie, are you not now on notice that before long technology is going to put you out of a job? And should we as passengers not take the view that saving jobs in London and elsewhere is more important than indulging the titans of tech in their business pipe dreams?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Reform UK and Labour peer Baroness Berger are questioning why a former Conservative council candidate has been appointed as an advisor to Kemi Badenoch. Joshua Bonehill-Payne was previously jailed for anti-Semitic abuse targeting Baroness Berger. He says the Conservative leader has asked him to advise the party's Culture and Integration Commission. Danny Stone, Chief Executive of the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, told LBC he's seen no evidence of the rehabilitation work Bonehill-Payne says he's undertaken.
That worries me because I would have thought that transparency would be the key here. And it's similar to the Kanye West or the Ye approach for me, which is the kind of the first thing that I would want to do as a person who's seeking to reform and prove myself in this space, be run for public office? No. I would want a long and detailed way of showing that I had changed, and I don't think we're there yet.
LBC has learned hundreds of spaces are empty at a new prison as thousands of inmates are due to be released early. HMB Millsyke in Yorkshire is only 3/4 full a year after opening due to severe staffing shortages. It says the government faces a growing backlash over measures to free some offenders to ease prison overcrowding. Mark Fairhurst, the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association, told LBC working conditions are putting a lot of people off.
They don't pay enough wages. It's a really dangerous jail with lots of incidents every single shift, and they can't retain staff. People are leaving as soon as they start. We're hearing reports that if you recruit 30 staff who start tomorrow because they've just finished their training, by the end of next week you'll probably only have 15 left.
A watchdog has dropped disciplinary proceedings against the police officer who fatally shot Chris Cabba. Martin Blake was cleared of murdering the 24-year-old when officers tried to stop his car in 2022 in South London. The IOPC stopped pursuing the case following a government decision to change regulations around police use of force. A mass stabbing in London's Covent Garden earlier is being treated as an isolated mental health incident. 4 men were hurt, with 2 still in hospital with injuries that is described as not life-threatening or changing. A 47-year-old woman has been arrested. And FIFA officials have spent the day in crisis talks in Morocco after Gianni Infantino summoned senior staff to an emergency meeting. It comes as pressure on his presidency continues to mount. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 8 points at 10,888. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.16. LBC weather. Tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north, clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds, a low of 8. Early cloud and a few showers tomorrow, turning drier with sunny spells for most later, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daisy Steele.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks.
In for Ian Dale for one more hour tonight, and again tomorrow, and again next week. And if you are really a glutton for punishment, you can join me on Saturday and Sunday this weekend, because I'll be here on both days from 3 until 6. Now, if you were listening to the programme last night, you will know that in our final hour, we touched on the SpaceX rocket that was going to slam into the moon today. Well, it has slammed, and we're going to find out after the news at 9:30 what happened, what it all means, and why Elon Musk should be allowed to get away with it. We'll go talk to a senior advisor for science and exploration at the European Space Agency. That's coming up at 9:30. But throughout this hour, I want to talk about the future of taxis and the future of jobs driving taxis, because today Uber and the self-driving developer Wave were granted by TfL the first minicab licences in London that will allow self-driving cars to take paying customers in the capital. For now, the cars are going to be required to have a human being sitting in the driver's seat, a so-called safety driver who will be ready to intervene if the cab acts erratically or is about to cause any kind of an accident. But I think we all know those days are unlikely to last. In fact, if you go to San Francisco, you can already see fully driverless vehicles on the streets. I was there a few months ago. It's bizarre to see them. I mean, it really takes your breath away when you first see them and you realise that a car is turning a corner, picking people up, and there is absolutely nobody sitting in the car until the passenger gets in. You could also have seen them in New York City up until March the 31st of this year, when New York did not renew permits that had been issued to Waymo, which is owned by Google's parent company Alphabet. Mayor Zoran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist now running New York City, says the driverless cars are job killers, even after Waymo told the state's governor that it was willing to create a $20 million fund to benefit taxi drivers and others who might be displaced by its technology. In other words, who might be out of a job as a result of it. Where do you think all this is going? There is an inexorable march towards a point where you simply won't need to drive a car because the car will be able to drive you. As I say, it's already happening on the streets of San Francisco. I've got two lads in their 20s, and it seems inevitable to me that by the time they're my age, they will baffle their children by explaining how, in the old days, everyone had to drive themselves around or be driven around by men and women called cabbies. But would you get into a driverless cab? Have you ridden in one? I have not. For me, it's not a safety issue. I just don't want to contribute to technological developments that are going to put more than 16,000 licensed taxi drivers out of business in London alone if this thing takes off. Where do we draw the line between what is technologically possible and what is economically disastrous for those people whose jobs will be eviscerated? And we're not just talking about cab drivers here, although we're talking specifically tonight about driverless cars, but all of this technology is going to start threatening so many jobs. The Prime Minister's team had suggested that he wanted to put the brakes on the plan to bring driverless cars to London's streets and eventually to the rest of the country. That does not appear to have happened yet, which is why Uber and Wave got this licence today from TfL. What do you make of it? I think it is the thin end of a job-killing wedge. Do we, as passengers, have a duty to help the cab drivers out by not getting into a driverless car? I'd like to know what you think. You can call me at 0345 6060 973, same number for WhatsApp that it is for the phones. You can text 84850. Let's begin our conversation by talking to Steve McNamara, the General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Mr. McNamara, thank you so much for being with us here on LBC tonight. I mean, for your members must be terrified about this news today that TfL has issued this licence. No? Good evening.
Good evening, Simon. No, we're not at all. You've made a very common mistake. You're referring to these as driverless taxis. They are, in fact, driverless private hire cars, what we in London call minicabs. They are not taxis. In London, taxis are funny black vehicles with a big sign on the front that says taxi. We are the most regulated and controlled taxi service in the world, as you'll probably be well aware. We drive wheelchair accessible vehicles with all the disability accessible bits and pieces, and we have access to bus lanes and all various different bits of legislation that do not apply to private hire minicabs in London. So no, we're not worried. If I was an Uber driver and I was driving a private hire car for Uber, I think I would be mildly concerned. You mentioned San Francisco. I've been there. What you fail to tell people is in San Francisco, these things are a tourist attraction. You go to San Francisco, you go to Alcatraz, you ride the cable car up to Union Square, you visit Pier Wharf 39, and you go for a ride in a Waymo car. And the hotels have leaflets telling you how to do it. It's a tourist attraction. Real San Franciscans don't go to Alcatraz, they don't ride the cable car, and they don't ride in Waymo cars. And there's very good reasons for that. Firstly, they're very expensive. And secondly, they're very slow and very hesitant as they drive around San Francisco. What people are not telling you as well is the Prime Minister is looking at it. We know he's looking at it. Heidi Alexandra, who is no fool, I know Heidi well from when she was the Deputy Mayor in London, She seems obsessed with these things, and she seems to think that they're job creators rather than job killers. What she fails to mention is that, of course, when you deal with these American tech giants, any money that's made is quickly wangled its way back to the West Coast via the British Virgin Islands or any other tax-dodging tax haven. The other issues that we need to look at is we're constantly told how safe these things are going to be. And yet anybody who's watching this now, quick Google of what's happening in London, and you'll see the videos that are now quite famous of the Waymo car that drives into the police roadblock at a crime scene, the one that drives the wrong way up the Haymarket. It's a 5-lane road southbound, for those who don't know. And the big concern in America, and the reason that they've been banned in New York, or they've been unlicensed or unable to operate in New York, is that they were doing what's known in America as deadheading. This is a very serious concern where once the cars have dropped somebody off, they just drive around aimlessly, very slowly and very cautiously as they do, creating congestion, creating pollution, and just creating a problem. Now, for those that don't know, London is the most congested city in Europe. We win that award every year. And we're now the 5th most congested city in the world. And unless we desperately want to be the most congested city in the world, the only thing we can do is seriously look at the benefits of these things. And what they are, they're a solution looking for a problem, and we haven't got a problem.
Why do you not think that there's going to be driverless private hire cars today, but not driverless black cabs tomorrow?
Right, well, anybody who's ever driven a cab in London, and it does apply to some extent with private hire vehicles, the general public are of the opinion that you pick somebody up, you take them where they want to go, and that's the end of the transaction, if you like. That does happen, but it's incredibly rare. People get in cabs, they forget their phone. They've got to go home for their phone. They suddenly get a phone call. They've got to turn around. They remember they've got to get a bunch of flowers or whatever. Happens constantly. People change destination. We had a member last week in one shift. He had 4 phones left in his cab. He's driving around with 4 phones on the dashboard waiting for them to ring. About 30% of our work in London and the Greater London area involves some form of person with a mobility or a disability issue. Not necessarily wheelchairs, although we do a lot of those. It's people that have got heavy luggage, women with buggies, or men with buggies, people with buggies, people with heavy luggage, people who want assistance, people who want to get in and out of the vehicle. That is not going to be replicated by a driverless car. It might do some journeys, but an awful lot of what we do, it's not going to replicate. It's not going to be able to use bus lanes. It's not going to be able to navigate the streets of London as only a black cab driver can do. Now, I've been hearing for years how the knowledge, which is the test, as you know, that cabs, it's finished, it's all over. Every single test that's ever been done by any journalist, TV or radio station, and I think LBC have done a few, where we put a cab driver against somebody with a sat-nav. Not only do we win by miles. And the difference is we keep London moving. These things are going to slow London down.
So do you think that, and I was in a black cab today, love black cabs, all in favour of them, but I still am deeply dubious that you think you are sufficiently protected that your members are not going to find themselves facing the same kind of sentiments that Uber drivers, for example, or Bolt drivers are facing tonight. This realisation that technology is marching on and there's big money in all of this, as you know, and one way of saving big money is to get rid of the bloke behind the steering wheel.
Well, again, that's another myth. Firstly, when you get a private hire vehicle in London, if you're Uber or Bolt, the guy who gets the driver, he turns up with the car. He looks up, he supplies the car, he insures the car, he maintains the car, he deals with lost property, he cleans the car, he deals with punctures and minor road scuffs and things that happen all day long. He negotiates everything. If you get rid of him, who is going to do all that? You're going to need an army of people to do that. Yeah, it's not as simple as you make out.
But Steve, honestly, do you think the people at Alphabet in Silicon Valley who are running Waymo care about any of that?
No, they don't care about anything. All they care about is chasing the mighty dollar. And the negative impacts of that, as we saw happening in New York, they put a stop to it. Now,
but they put a stop to it in New York because Zoran Mamdani was committed to doing it. And I'm not hearing from you that you think Andy Burnham himself is necessarily committed to doing it. I mean, especially if Louise Haigh is advising him.
Right. Well, I can tell you that, and you'll need to get Andy Burnham to speak for himself, but I can tell you that he is concerned about it. I can tell you absolutely that Sir Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is very concerned about it. And I can tell you all the top people at TfL and the licensing teams at Transport for London are particularly concerned about it. The bus companies are concerned about it.
But they gave the licence today. Why'd they give the licence today?
No, what happens is they've given a licence for the vehicle to drive with a driver in it.
Yeah, but how long's that going to last? Come on, how long's that going to last?
Well, but in order to drive it without a driver is going to be a massive, massive step. So what we've got at the moment, forget the hype and the spin from and incidentally, Uber and Waymo have recently fallen out, as you're aware. Mind you, Uber fall out of everyone, as we know, but they've fallen out with Waymo and they're now in bed with Wave. I mean, how long is that going to last? Look, these people are interested in selling the software. The money is in the software. And let me tell you where the money is going to be. There are an enormous number of people listening to this and around the country who have reached a certain age. My parents did it, and perhaps your parents will, or others, where somebody is going to have to take the car off them because they're no longer able to drive or we consider they're no longer safe. This is, as you know, the wealthy grey pound. If they can buy a car from any mode of manufacturer that they can park on their drive or outside their house, that's going to take them where they want to go, take them to the hospital, take them to the shopping, take them around their daughters, sons, whatever, without them having to drive, and give them the freedom and the mobility that they've had in many cases since the 1960s, those people are going to buy that car. And that's where the money is. It is not in driverless taxis or driverless private hire cars. That's where the money is. That's what they're looking at. But again, the key issue to come out of all of this is a solution looking for a problem. There isn't a problem. It works well. They're going to cause a problem. We're gonna get the headache, and they're going to get the money. As they always say, it's the poor what get the pleasure, it's the rich what get the pleasure, and the poor what get the blame. And it's the poor Londoners who are going to get the blame, the congestion and the pollution, while Silicon Valley line their pockets.
Steve McNamara, I'm very grateful to you for kicking our conversation off tonight. General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. The switchboard is filling up. It looks like a Christmas tree. You can join the conversation at 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. It's 19 minutes past 9.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m.
Zach Polanski says the hot weather is the biggest threat Britain's faced since the Second World War. Is that a bit much, or is he right? Plus, a former neo-Nazi stands down as a Tory council candidate despite insisting he's changed. And talking of holding people to account, the police watchdog has dropped its investigation into the officer who shot dead Chris Cabba. We'll look at whether our police need more protection.
Ben Kentish from 10 p.m. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Picture your car. You want to sell it, but you feel trapped by the chains of your finance deal. Now, listen closely. Hear that? That was the sound of your car selling and the cash hitting your account. It's easy to sell your financed car on Motorway. We'll handle the admin and pay off the finance for you. It's not magic, it's Motorway. Sell your car today at motorway.co.uk. Process may vary in case of negative equity.
A message from TfL for drivers and motorcyclists. Before you turn, look around. Is there a cyclist in your path or approaching behind you? You now need to always let them pass before you turn. Follow the highway code to keep everyone safe. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Hey Sainsbury's, any way you can save me a few quid on my weekly shop?
Well, Jane, try Your Nectar prices. Every week in Your Nectar app, you can unlock up to 10 personalised discounts on things you love at Sainsbury's. A Janesbury's, if you will.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Get personalised discounts with Your Nectar prices. That's good food for all of us. Sainsbury's. 18 plus Nectar app required. Unlock up to 10 Your Nectar prices weekly. Available in supermarkets, online and in locals with Smart Shop. T&Cs apply.
Simon Marks on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Right, we have got so many calls and we're going to get as many of them in as possible between now and Ben Kentish. Let's go to Gwent in South Wales and start with Patrick. Evening, Patrick.
Hello, Simon. How are you, mate?
Very well, thanks, mate. How are you?
All right. I never thought I'd get to speak to you.
Well, anyway, I'm delighted to be speaking to you as well, Patrick. What do you think about these driverless taxis or licensed cabs, private hire cars?
Well, the thing is, right, I don't know so much about the taxi, right? But I think what we need to do, I hope it's a good step forward because I want one that I can have for myself. And I'll tell you why, right? Look, I'm only 54 now. In 2013, which is 13 years ago, yeah, in my sleep, I had a stroke and it took my peripheral vision away, right? And then when I was in hospital, the doctor said to me, "Do you drive?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you can't." And that was it. There was no, "Well, you might be able to." I can't. I'll never drive again, right? Now, I haven't driven for the last 13 years. I've got 5 grandkids. I haven't been able to drive them no way. And I would love nothing, I swear to God, I would love nothing more than to be able to go into a showroom tomorrow and buy a driverless car that I can sit in, put in the coordinates, and they take me down to pick up my grandkids, and I can take them swimming. Because the thing is, see, Simon, I can see what I'm looking at, but I've got no peripheral vision. See, it's very hard to describe. There's a word for it, right? And when I heard that word, I never heard a word of it like it in my life. Homonymous hemanopia. Have you ever heard that word before?
I have not heard that word before.
Right. Well, if you Google that word, right, homonymous hemanopia, basically it means half-blind, right? But it's worse than half-blind. If I'm looking at 2 people, I can see the person on the left, the person on the right, I can't see them unless I move my head. And that's the God's truth. So, the sooner they get an autonomous car, or whatever you call an autonomous car, Elon Musk will keep smashing satellites into the moon and all sorts. Let's have one of these autonomous cars outside for me. Sorry.
Well, Patrick, you've given us all, I think, tremendous pause for thought, and I'm very sorry that you've lost your peripheral vision.
It is what it is.
But
right?
why?
Simon, honestly,
why would you?
About it.
But why would you prefer to have a driverless car that you could take your grandkids around in, rather than having a car with a taxi driver?
Because I don't want the car to be a taxi. I want the car for me. Do you understand what I mean?
Yep.
I want to be able to jump in the car now, put in the coordinates, nip down to my daughter's, pick the kids up, and then put the coordinates in down to the seaside, and off we go.
Going to give you freedom.
Yeah, exactly. It will give me back my independence. Because I swear to God, right, I got a full driving licence, right, not a point on it. And the day that this happened to me, the first thing he said, "Do you drive?" I said, "Yeah." He said, this is his words, "Well, you can't." And that was it. And I had to phone a DVLA and all the rest of it, right? I've never driven since. And I mean, it's too young for all that. And I swear to God, right, it's wrecked my life, man.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, Patrick, and I know many of our listeners will be.
All I'm saying is, right, if you can get any leeway on this, right, or any for whatever, get onto it and tell them the sooner we can get on them autonomous cars for the likes of myself, because I can see what I'm looking at. Look, I can see. It's just because I got no peripheral vision, I can't drive.
Yeah, no, I understand. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, Patrick, thank you. You've given us huge amounts of food for thought. That's Patrick in Gwent. Really glad you called the programme. Medina has texted in from Folkestone to say, "Evening, Simon. I am blind and would never want to travel in a driverless car or taxi. How do we key in our destination or pay?" Hopefully you will read this out while I have Medina, and thank you for sending it in. Let's go to Mayfair. Maxwell is there. Evening, Maxwell, and you are a cabbie, right?
Hello, Simon. Yeah, I'm a green badge black taxi driver in London. And I was in Mayfair, but believe it or not, it's only taken me 10 minutes. I'm down at Battersea Power Station.
Wow, well done.
Now,
I should have been driving with you earlier today.
Well, yeah, if you was in a Waymo, you'd still be struggling.
No, I wasn't in a Waymo. I was in a black cab. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But carry on. Tell me what you think.
Well, me for one, and my colleagues, we can't wait for the Waymo to hit the streets, because we've spent the last 6 months watching these cars. It's been hilarious watching them go the wrong way up the Haymarket, watching them try and turn left up Berkeley Street from the Piccadilly. And I don't know who these tech billionaire giants are, but one of them must be Paul Daniels, because there was one of these Waymos going the wrong way up the Strand Underpass tunnel. So, and that's with a driver inside them. So I don't know what they're going to do when there's no drivers in it. I mean, there's not one of my passengers that I've spoken to, and none of my colleagues. They're never getting one of them. Never in a million years.
OK, well, I can't verify what you're telling me about these driverless cars and the errors that they may have been making. What do you know about these safety drivers? Are they... I mean, they're licensed too, right?
Well, I don't know anything about their licences or anything like that, but we went past one the other day, me and my passengers, looking out the door, and it looked like there was no one in them, but no one in one of these Waymos. But a little bit further back, he must have been about 5 foot away from the steering wheel, just sort of on his phone.
Well, I mean, but you're there as a safety driver. You're there to intervene if something goes wrong.
So what's the point in having them then? That's what we're here for, aren't we? That's what we're doing. I can't get mid round it.
And you're not fearful that your livelihood is going to be threatened by this? You think the public's going to reject it, turn against it? And what would you say to the public? Would you say don't use them?
If you want to use it, I was thinking of nothing worse. People, my passengers get in a cab, believe it or not, they like talking to me. I mean, my wife might not, but all my passengers do, and that's what they get into. And what Steve McNamara said, he said about there being a tourist attraction in San Francisco. What he failed to mention was we're a tourist attraction here. Tourists come to London, they want to jump in one of us. You know what I mean, we get them around London A to B. We love what we do, and listen, and we would love. Like Steve said, they're going to take Uber's jobs away from them. So, if anything, we'll still be here in 100 years' time. I've only been a cabbie 4 years, but while I was doing it, the game's dead. There's no point doing it. Well, why don't you be an Uber driver? I've had someone in the back of my cab for the last 4 years. It's been brilliant.
All right, Maxwell, good luck. Thanks very much for calling the programme and happy driving. Let's go to Horsham in West Sussex. Tony is there. Evening, Tony.
Oh, good evening, Simon. I think the driverless cars are inevitable. The faster it happens, the more likely there's going to be pain, injuries, possibly deaths, and no one to blame. The software suppliers will blame the component suppliers will blame the car manufacturers, and nobody in the end will be to blame. And I think that it's a bit like aircraft when they first introduced the fly-by-wire computerized systems. There were a lot of accidents that happened, and now flying is the safest form of transport. But it's taken a lot of pain, a lot of injuries, a lot of deaths.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that that's true about driverless cars at this point. I mean, their safety record, obviously there have been accidents, just as there are accidents when cars are driven by human beings. But I don't think there's been a huge amount of literature to suggest that, you step into one of these things and it's a death trap. The question really is, should we be stepping into them given the potential impact? You just heard from Maxwell there. He says they're going to do for the Uber drivers and the Bolt drivers.
Yeah, and the jobs thing is not something I'm really aware of. And the problem with the technology isn't apparent now because they're hardly used. And San Francisco, of course, just has block streets. It's very easy to do. But London's completely different ball game.
Yeah, well, that's a conversation we were just having here during the last commercial break. In many ways, there are American cities that, because of their grid system, like New York City, for example, may be more suited to this than the ancient streets of London with their higgledy-piggledy patterns. We're going to keep talking about this all the way up until 10 o'clock. Also coming up,
we're expecting to see a huge plume of dust shooting up into the lunar sky, maybe 50 kilometres up.
If you weren't listening to yesterday's programme, and why on earth weren't you, you may have missed the news that SpaceX appear to have launched their first moon mission, but it's not the way that you might anticipate it going. We're going to discuss that incident after the latest news headlines at 9:30 that come from Daisy Steele.
A Conservative candidate with previous convictions for anti-Semitic abuse has withdrawn from next May's council elections in Somerset. Joshua Bonehill-Payne will instead advise the party on radicalisation, something Reform UK says beggars belief. LBC has been told hundreds of spaces are empty at a new prison in Yorkshire as thousands of offenders are due to be released early. HMP Millsyke is only 3/4 full, a year after being opened because of severe staff shortages. Chris Cabba's family says a decision to drop misconduct proceedings against the police officer that shot him dead is a devastating blow. A jury previously cleared Sergeant Martin Blake of murder in 2022. LBC weather. Tonight, cloudy with patchy rain in the north, clearer elsewhere with isolated showers and lighter winds. A low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Pick up more sun cream. Impromptu picnic. Late night cinema trip. Do more this summer. Hop on and off with the Weekend Hopper. Get unlimited weekend bus and tram journeys for £1.75 per day every Saturday and Sunday from the 25th of July. Plan your journey with the TfL Go app. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Offer valid from 4:30am on the 25th of July until 23:59 Monday the 31st of August. Always use the same card or device when touching in. For more information, search TfL Hopper.
Shots from halfway causing goalkeeping howlers. Roofs badly leaking from sudden rain showers. Saturday hackers and onion sizzling. These are a few of our favourite things. When you're singing, yet not winning. When your bet's gone bad. We simply remember our favourite things, and then we'll feel so glad.
For all your favourite things, visit BetVictor. 18+, gambleaware.org. Please gamble responsibly.
Hey Sainsbury's, any way you can save me a few quid on my weekly shop?
Well, Jane, try Your Nectar Prices. Every week in Your Nectar app, you can unlock up to 10 personalised discounts on things you love at Sainsbury's. A Janesbury's, if you will.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Get personalised discounts with Your Nectar Prices. That's good food for all of us. Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's. 18+, Nectar app required. Unlock up to 10 Your Nectar Prices weekly. Available in supermarkets, online and in locals with Smart Shop. T&Cs apply.
Simon Marks on LBC. Text 84850.
More on the pros and cons of driverless cabs in a moment. But if you were listening to this programme at this time last night, you will know that we previewed something that happened earlier today on the moon. A stray SpaceX rocket, owned, of course, by Elon Musk, about the size of a 5-storey building, crashed into the moon at a speed of 5,400 miles per hour, creating a short, dramatic flash that may have been seen by some amateur astronomers here on Earth, but larger observatories in the US are now analysing data that will tell us more about the impact of the impact. What do we make of the idea that Elon Musk's SpaceX can engage scot-free, responsibility-free, in what is arguably the most extraordinary bit of industrial littering in human history? I'm going to talk now to Mark McCrohan, former senior advisor for science and exploration at the European Space Agency, joining me tonight from Heidelberg in Germany. Mark is also a member of the advisory board to the International Astronomical Union's Centre for the Protection of Dark and Quiet Skies. And I think I mangled your surname, Mark. It's Mark McCrohan, who's joining me from Heidelberg tonight. Let's start with what happened. What do we know about what happened? I mean, it has happened, right? This spacecraft, as far as we know, has struck the moon at vast speeds and presumably been completely destroyed. What do we know about what occurred? Good evening.
Good evening, Simon. Well, this, in a sense, wasn't quite the accident or, on the other hand, a deliberate event. It was the leftover upper stage from a Falcon 9 rocket from SpaceX that actually was used to launch scientific rovers to the surface of the moon. And of course that brought it to within the moon's sphere of influence, and once it dropped the landers on the surface, then it was uncontrolled, and it was figured out sometime afterwards that it would actually collide with the moon. And I think, to be fair, it's by no means the first rocket or the first upper stage that's landed, hit the moon and made a big splash. Many of the Apollo components of Apollo were dropped on the moon, and many other satellite upper stages and rockets upper stages have done that over the years. I think roughly 100 or so times the moon has been impacted in that way.
What will we learn as, I believe it's NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter now photographs the site, and we'll have these before and after pictures? What may we learn? I know we don't know yet what it'll be, but what are the possibilities here?
Well, there was an experiment proposed more than 15 years ago when I was working for the European Space Agency to dispose of one of ESA's satellites on the moon, the Herschel satellite. It's an astronomy satellite, but it had reached the end of life. And the scientists presented a case that said if you go in, fast enough, and of course the rockets do that anyway naturally because of their speed in the solar system, that you can dig down underneath what's the surface of the moon, which is called the regolith, the dust on the top, see if you can find other material underneath. And when you inject that into space, if you're looking with a powerful telescope, with a spectroscope to actually analyze the light, the spectrum of the light, maybe you can find water, for example, locked under the surface. So I think at that level, there are some interesting things, but again, it's not the first time it's been done.
And by what arrangement did Elon Musk... I mean, was there any requirement for him to get any permission to do this? How does the sovereignty, if you like, the territorial sovereignty of the moon work in a legal sense?
Well, that's a very good question. And of course, you know, in essence, this is sort of a metaphor, not just for the moon, but for what goes on in low Earth orbit, which there are tens of thousands of satellites now in orbit around the Earth, and some of those crash on Earth. And that, you could argue, is a much more important issue than today landing on the moon where there are no humans. There may be humans in the future. And of course, NASA and the European Space Agency and China, of course, are working to put humans there. And doing this in an uncontrolled way is something that will be frowned upon very soon. So at the moment, there's no need to seek permission. But again, reflecting back on Earth, I think this raises the question that SpaceX is by far the largest launcher of rockets into low Earth orbit at the moment. Some of their rockets also come through Earth's atmosphere. The upper stages, and many of their satellites come down after a few years as well, and that brings heavy metals into the upper atmosphere. In some cases, bits have landed on the land. People have found it sort of in their back garden. So I think, we are a bit of a Wild West at the moment, and I think it's something that urgently needs to be addressed because the number of launches just seems to be rising very rapidly.
I mean, it's staggeringly irresponsible, isn't it?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are, of course, big fans of Elon and what he's doing to take humans as the whole destiny question. I don't buy that. I think that, indeed, as you say, there is a great deal of responsibility on all agencies, NASA, ESA and others, and the European Space Agency has this thing called the Clean Space Initiative, which is to make sure you just don't leave things up in orbit, that they are brought down responsibly or disposed of elsewhere in the solar system. But there are no laws about this at the moment. And of course, as is typically the case when you have people with a lot of money and a lot of resources, and particularly in a fairly unregulated environment, they're well ahead of the law and they're testing the law constantly. We work with the United Nations to try to look at light pollution, how those many Starlink satellites are polluting the night sky, not just that we can see them, but radio observatories and so on. So we're in a very difficult time trying to catch up with the momentum of SpaceX and other launch companies.
Well, and he's also talking about putting 1 million more satellites up there, to build data centres in space. Who governs all of that?
It's the same, essentially. You get launch authority from the government in the country where you are, and they have responsibility. Of course, at the moment in America, I would say that's fairly dysfunctional given the current administration. But many of these launch operators have talked about buying private islands and launching from those. So I think there's sort of, we are in that situation where we, as the people who look up at the night sky and have stuff rain down upon us, need to look at the benefits. Is Starlink a good thing? And is it worth what we're paying for it? Not just in terms of money. And again, for astronomers, that issue is a very important one. It's not only telescopes on the ground that see the Starlink satellites go by, the Hubble Space Telescope sees them go by, creates bright streaks across their images. So, this whole idea about data in space, that's a whole nother conversation because there's a lot of engineering there that clearly hasn't been solved yet.
Mark McCaughrean, I'm enormously grateful to you. Thanks very much for joining us tonight from Heidelberg, former Senior Advisor for Science and Exploration at the European Space Agency and also a member of the Advisory Board to the International Astronomical Union's Centre for the Protection of Dark and Quiet Skies. And who among us would not want to protect dark and quiet skies, apart from a very, very wealthy bloke out in California? Let's talk to Nick in Holland Park about driverless taxis. Evening, Nick.
Hi, Simon. Great stand-in. I'm loving your takeover of the Ian Dale show.
He'll be back. He will return.
Oh, really? Okay. So I was in the States for the World Cup in June and July, and it was in San Francisco. Took a couple of driverless hire cars. And
you did the Waymos, did you, Nick?
Did away, if we're allowed to use the brand, I suppose you are, because it's the only one. And I loved it. The first thing to understand is it is slightly pricier than the other rides there, so Uber, Bolt and Lyft. But it's not a direct comparison. I agree with your very first, the head of cabbies or whoever he was, Sean, was it? Can't
Steve,
remember. Steve McNamara. There's a slight novelty premium, but actually the real premium is that I don't know what cars they're using in London, but in San Francisco, they're all really smart, super clean and new, all electric.
Yeah, and they look
Jaguar
exactly the same on the streets of London. I mean, I don't know if it's branded the same, but they look identical.
Yeah, so they're clean, they're smart, they're all electric, they're quiet. I actually went in with a friend and I've got family. Both my brothers live in San Francisco, and everyone they know, everyone I spoke to, it's not a novelty and it's not being used by tourists. People use it as their taxi transport of choice when they're not using their own car.
I think you've made an important point, because I think Steve McNamara was overstating it earlier on the programme, because I've, of course, also have spent a fair bit of time in San Francisco lately, and I think people are using them there and are almost, in some cases, as used to using them as so many people just a few years ago became to the concept of using Ubers. But I wonder would you do it again? I mean, would you do it on a regular basis, or would there be part of you that says, I want to help preserve jobs, I'm not getting into that thing?
No, I would definitely get into one. I wouldn't get one in London where there's still a human driver. I'd love the idea of being in a car, not having to talk to anyone, having my own private space or whoever I'm with. By the way, I want to point out another small technical advantage in the timing, and it's a subtle one. Anyone that's ever got an Uber or one of those other cars, there's often can be anything up to a minute or two where where your phone churns over and says it's looking for a driver. It's doing no such thing. What's happening is the individual drivers, are bidding and saying whether they're going to accept your ride. And sometimes it immediately says, oh, your driver's 5 minutes away. It churns a bit more, and then suddenly someone else takes it at 7 minutes. With the Lyft app, and I watched it happen on a phone, the timing and pickup is nanoseconds after you click confirm I want the ride and you confirm the price, because it's all, there's no individual driver to say, oh yeah, I'll take that, or no, I've got to get back to Golders Green tonight, so I'm not going to take that fare, the way black cabs do. So huge advantages over it. And I also want to widen this out as well, because I think the guy from the London black cabs also mentioned TfL are against it, and they're worried about buses and things. But this is going to come for buses as well. And by the way, the driving of the
it's going to come for the tube. Of course it is. It's going to come for all of us.
Well, except it should have come for the tube and the trains decades ago, because the technology's been there. But of course, you've got to get past the dinosaur unions for that. But that will happen eventually.
Well, but you know, you can. I know you can advance that argument. But you can also advance the argument that at a certain point, technology is going to be able to replace most of it. I mean, I woke up this morning to discover that there had been 268 job losses at a large news organisation out in the United States. And they are engaging in those job losses because they're moving everything over in production terms in the back end to AI. I mean, you can do it, but is it going to make us a happier planet to live on if we're dealing with all of these people, tube drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers, that are basically suddenly told, I'm sorry, your services are no longer required?
It's a very interesting question, and one which is above my pay grade, but here's my thoughts on it. Although theoretically we'll need less people, so hopefully the population can gradually over some decades or centuries be reduced, which would be much better for the environment and the planet. But on the other hand, all these big apps and super corporations and other people are still going to need human consumers. Who are they going to sell to?
Well, exactly. Nick, thank you very much indeed for sharing your experiences in San Francisco, driving in the back of a quiet, driverless cab. Would you do the same thing, or would you be like me and worry about the fact that this is going to put people out of jobs? And I think, you know, with the greatest of respect to Steve McNamara, who was on with us earlier in the hour, I think it might be overly optimistic to think that the black cabs are going to be completely inoculated against any threat from this kind of technology. I'd love to believe it. I'm just not sure I'm convinced. Tell me what your view is at 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. It's 9:45.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
Kemi Badenoch says she's disappointed after a former neo-Nazi steps down as a Tory council candidate. Where do we draw the line on second chances? Plus, do armed police officers need more protection from the law?
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Hi, Nan. We're having a brilliant time. We went to a theme park and the rides were awesome. We got money off the entry tickets, so Dad even bought us all an ice cream with a flake. Probably not the best idea before going on a roller coaster. Sammy went green after. See you when we get home. Love, Leo.
Enjoy great British summer savings, such as discounted entry to theme parks, soft play and more. Funded by the UK government.
Imagine you in a nice comfy seat, with your hands behind your head, taking in the views, instead of taking on the road, maybe even taking a nap. That's the bliss of getting where you need to go without worrying about driving. Book your train journey via avantiwestcoast.co.uk and we'll take you there. Avanti West Coast. Feel good travel.
From countryside escapes to seaside breaks, and plenty of open roads in between, there's a Mazda for every kind of summer. Get 0% APR on selected models when ordered by the 30th of September, and keep your mind on the really important stuff, like trying to eat that ice cream before it melts. Search Mazda. Available on PCP when financed by Mazda Financial Services by the 31st of December 2026. Indemnities may be required. Terms apply. See website.
This is LBC with Simon Marks.
Mark has texted the programme. He says, I was sceptical of Waymo, these driverless cabs, until my friend told me his American girlfriend uses them all the time so she doesn't get hit on by drivers. I imagine that alone will give them a lot of customers. Mike has texted the programme to say that he's ridden in some of these self-driving taxis in Los Angeles. And the driving is safer than the unregulated options. One of my female friends uses them all the time in the evening to get home safe. However, he says, in London, we're very lucky to have black cabs. Sadly, we don't have them in all our towns and cities. Rob is in Linfield in West Sussex. Good evening, Rob. What's your view?
Yeah, good. So very quickly, Simon, I do love your American Week. It's
Thank you, mate.
And informative, and I'll try and be the same now. So I grew up in Brussels. I'm 60 now. I grew up in Brussels in the late 70s, early 80s. And we got trams everywhere, you know? They got a good metro system, but there's trams all running all around that. And London used to have trams, the trams up Oxford Street.
Yep,
and then,
all over the place.
And the TfL or whoever the company were then stopped it. And now it's like a bun fight of buses and stuff. And I think what annoys me about TfL is the trams are part of the identity of Belgium. And I think black cabs in London are part of our identity,
100%.
Our culture and our history. And what TfL aren't doing here, when everyone's worried about AI and it's taking lots of jobs away, is they could put a flag in the ground now and go, we're always going to have black cabs in London, because so many people come to London and see the palaces and the parks and the history, and seeing all of that without the black cabs running around and giving everyone a little bit of information. I think it's that thing, where does commerce stop? Takes away a bit of a country's identity. And I think, can you imagine going to Venice and, suddenly there's no gondoliers in their lovely stripy jumpers, ferreting you around? And I think this whole thing about when we lose a bit of I can understand how people who work in law come out of university and they can't get jobs because all those things are done on AI. And I hate that. But when it comes to a country's identity, TfL are just not factoring that in.
Well, Rob, let me play devil's advocate and suggest to you that actually what TfL has done today, I think they might argue, is create jobs. Because by providing this licence, the condition of the licence is that there has to be a human safety driver in a car that could one day be driverless, but at least for this licence, you've got to have a human safety driver there ready to take over if everything goes wrong. Now, I think this is the thin end of a very, very obviously thick wedge, and that, you know, the next stage will be that the cars are driverless, unless we find ourselves in the same situation that Mayor Zoran Mamdani has created in New York, where he said, right, that trial's done, we tried that, but this is a job killer, I'm not taking it any further.
Yeah, you might like to think that, but if you're TfL, you go, this will never happen. We got to protect, like London, when you visit London, and I lived there for years, like it's a visual experience.
Yeah.
And where these driverless cabs are black, they probably won't be. And then there'll be someone sitting next to them, but it's not that one-on-one thing. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know.
Like that, the whole visceral experience goes. And I think someone at some point has got to give the country some hope that technology won't kill things that are very much of the fabric of our sort of history and our city's identity.
I think that is hugely important, Rob. I'm really glad you made that point, because this is not just a story about driverless cabs and the future of black cabs and the future of a piece of British heritage. This is a proxy for a much bigger conversation this country desperately needs to be having about just how far we are going to allow unregulated AI to go. And I do think that one of the people in Andy Burnham's government with arguably the most important but also the most complicated job is the Minister for AI, Kanishka Narayan. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how he navigates all of this in the months and years ahead, because there is so much at stake. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about this tonight. Rob, thank you very much indeed for calling in. Let's go to Willesden Green, and Simone is there. Good evening, Simone. How are you tonight?
Yeah, good evening. Hi. So my view is I'm concerned about driverless cabs for disabled people. I'm disabled myself for lots of different reasons. You had a blind person already explaining his experiences. But if you're a wheelchair user, particularly if you're a manual wheelchair user, how are you going to get on? Because you're not going. How are you going to get into the cab? How are you going to be strapped in if you need assistance strapping in and belting up and coming off the cab? Then you've got people who have learning difficulties and people who are neurodivergent who might need some help in terms of knowing where they are and maybe asking for some directions to where they need to be in terms of their destination. And the vehicles, are they actually wheelchair accessible for disabled people?
Well, in their current form, I don't believe that those driverless cars are. But Simone, channeling my inner Elon Musk, which I'm not very good at doing generally, I would suggest that if he was talking to you, he would say, you've got to think much bigger and in a much more revolutionary way, because of course there'll be a vehicle that will accommodate a wheelchair, and it will come, and I'm serious about this, it will come with a robot that will be there to help get you into the car and will help strap you in. And if you're not sure where you're going and you've got questions to ask, you'll be able simply to use the equivalent of a smart speaker and ask the question, and that answer will all be provided to you by AI-driven technology. This in the minds of the people behind this stuff, and that's why this is such an important conversation. This doesn't stop just with the cab. This includes everything. I think that's where they want to go.
Okay, can I respond to that?
Of course.
Because obviously, because there's the whole talk about robot carers, right? As far as I can see, there aren't many. I work in the disabled people sector. There aren't many disabled people who are actually saying that robots are going to replace the human contact and the human need to be there to assist disabled people. And that's a move. IT will not replace the human touch and the need for human beings to be around to provide assistance for disabled people.
Simone, I really, really hope you are right. I really, really, really hope that they will not replace the hosts of phone-in programmes on radio stations. I would love to imagine that we can all be optimistic about that, and I'm delighted that you are. I just worry about what's coming down the road, if you'll pardon the pun. Simone, thanks very much indeed for calling. Joseph has texted in to say driverless cabs amount to glorified obstacle damage limitation exercises. They're not actually driverless. What they are just basically is bumper cars with sensors. That is not the real definition of a driver's cab, and artificial intelligence being applied to this doesn't actually improve the situation more than it would if I was doing it by remote control. Let's go to Iqbal in Canary Wharf. Evening, Iqbal. How are you tonight?
Hello, yes. London's finest black cab driver.
Good man.
Years now.
Outstanding.
Yes. Do you really think that corporate America will cater for the disabled like that lady has just pointed out to you?
I think if corporate America thinks they can make money out of catering for the disabled, they'll absolutely cater for them.
Well, they won't be able to make a profit for quite some time because all of those driverless vehicles, firstly, they have to be bought. Secondly, they have to be cleaned. Thirdly, they have to be serviced. Okay? When you take all of those the costs into account, you know, it's how much are they going to then charge the customer in order to recoup their investment and also all of those costs. But
Iqbal, I don't know how old you are. I mean, I'm now of advancing years.
Same here.
And I've got kids in their 20s. And as I was saying at the beginning of the programme, I find it hard to imagine that by the time my kids are my age and themselves of advancing years, even though I'm obviously still very young at heart, I wonder if they are not going to, by then, aren't cars that we manually drive going to be as much an artefact of history for them as the Model T Ford is for us?
Absolutely not, because you see there's a difference between a BMW, a Mercedes, a Ford, a Nissan, etc. Every car has its own characteristics, and one of the joys of life is having a different car as you go along in life.
So you got no concerns, Iqbal, that your job's on the line here?
Absolutely not. Steve is absolutely right. You know, it will affect, you know, they're going to get rid of all the drivers at Uber, etc., because they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars. They have to recoup that. And
Iqbal, can I ask you, because I was wondering about this, given what Steve had said and now what you said. Is it your position that actually these driverless cabs might be very bad news for Uber, but very good news for you because it'll get rid of Uber?
Well, there is that point. It's a very valid point. I mean, their drivers have already demonstrated at City Hall. They shouted down the guys from Waymo and the guys from Wavy when they tried to speak there.
Okay.
I mean, there was a little bit of a rumpus that took place.
All right. Well, there's going to be a lot of drama out there as this plays out. Iqbal, thanks very much indeed for wrapping up our hour on driverless cabs and what has been a very busy night here on LBC. I will be back tomorrow from 7. Everything's on catch-up. You can find it on the LBC app, the global player. You know where to go. Coming up at 1, it'll be Richard Spur, but right now, it's Ben Kentish.
Thank you, Simon. Hello there. A very, very good evening indeed. Welcome to Late Nights with Ben Kentish here on LBC. Tonight,
Conservative Party believes in second chances. His association who know him have considered that he would be a good representative, even with the things that he's done in the past.
A former neo-Nazi jailed for racist abuse and harassment stand down as a Conservative council candidate today after a